Em 30 segundos, iniciaremos nossa transmissão. Senhores, solicito que durante a apresentação não seja feita a passagem dos senhores pela tela. Então, toda a passagem de deslocamento deve ser feita pela retaguarda. Não deve ser feita a passagem por frente da tela ou por trás do moderador. Obrigado. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Damas e cavalheiros, buenos dias. Senhoras e senhores, bom dia. Welcome to Hemisférica Ciberdefensa Conference. Bienvenidos a la Conferência Hemisférica de Defensa Cibernética. Sejam todos bem-vindos à Conferência Hemisférica de Defesa Cibernética. We have simultaneous translation into English. Tenemos tradução simultânea al espanhol. Temos tradução simultânea para o português. Procure o botão de tradução referente ao seu idioma. Senhoras e senhores, sou o Coronel Marcos Lemco de Souza, do Exército Brasileiro, e desempenho as funções de assessor de desminagem humanitária e novas tecnologias na Junta Interamericana de Defesa, e atuarei como moderador desta Conferência Hemisférica de Defesa Cibernética. Fique à vontade para interagir pelo chat das plataformas Zoom e YouTube. Suas dúvidas serão aproveitadas pela Junta Interamericana de Defesa. Apresente suas ideias. O chat de nossas plataformas pode ser usado para visualização e divulgação de novas propostas. Apresente suas sugestões para o seguinte questionamento: como alcançar a cooperação internacional em defesa cibernética? Durante a conferência, apresentaremos periodicamente a agenda que será seguida em nossa Conferência Hemisférica de Defesa Cibernética, a qual encontra-se em exposição neste momento. Iniciamos nossas atividades desse evento com as palavras de abertura do Major General Richard Highcamp, que nos agracia com sua presença nas instalações da Casa do Soldado. O general Highcamp pertence ao Exército dos Estados Unidos e é o diretor do Colégio Interamericano de Defesa, CID, e será o responsável pelas palavras de abertura da Conferência Hemisférica de Defesa Cibernética. General, é um prazer recebê-lo nesta sala do Conselho de Delegados da Junta Interamericana de Defesa. Seja muito bem-vindo. Please, General Highcamp, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Colonel Marcos. It's very good to have you here as our moderator. Thank you for coming. General Flavio, General Salazar, Greatly appreciate the invitation to be here at the CASA today. What I value for this is the opportunity to miss school. Yes, so in the US, we call it cutting class, right? To miss school, play hooky, except General Cadu, your friend, yes, has gotten a little too good at it. So I would appreciate maybe during one of the coffee breaks, you could counsel him. Maybe sometimes he actually comes to the class. But yes, my friends from Brazil, I don't know what I'd do without you. But no, Cadu and I take great pride in leading your college. You have entrusted us. You have elected us to this position to lead your college. You have given us a charter. And part of that charter, one of the most important parts of that charter, is to train our students on our history, on why this board was established. And we take that very seriously. And that why, that history, is very important, not just to the students of the college, but what we're going to talk about today. And so let's think about the history of the board and why the founding fathers established this board. So if you think about during World War II and what was happening in the Western Hemisphere, those leaders at the time were looking at what was happening in Europe and the great devastation that was happening there, and the lack of respect towards sovereignty, the lack of respect towards governance and the rule of law and constitutions and borders. And the same thing was happening in Asia. And how could we ever prevent this from happening in the Western Hemisphere? And that's how that group of nations, our forefathers, came together to form the Inter-American Defense Board, that we would not allow nations to disrespect the fundamental foundation of democracy. And that's what we come here today to fundamentally talk about as well. We need everyone to be accountable to the rule of law, the authority of strong institutions, so that we can create trust and confidence that enables all nations of the Western Hemisphere to work together towards this common ideal. Now, this call to unity in 1942 is needed as much today as it was then. You see, then we worried about invasions. We worried about invasions. We worried about the hum of airplanes overhead, the rumble of tanks across our borders. We have the fear of invasions today, but those are silent invasions. Those are invasions that have no regard for sovereignty or borders or the rule of law. Those are invasions, cyber invasions, that completely undermine the people's fundamental trust in our institutions. This quiet cyber invasion of our borders, this invisible attack against our sovereignty. That some companies and governments and nations try to fight the enemy alone, fearing disclosure will damage their reputation with their partners and with their people. Instead, this silence only foments distrust and doubt in these strong institutions we were talking about. It erodes the confidence we have as partners. So the answer to cyber defense is the same as it was in 1942. It's trust in strong institutions. It's cooperation and working together. It's sharing information. To share openly, we must work together and counter this threat. Cooperation is our strongest weapon. General Flavio, I must thank Brazil for its leadership in this effort. As General Cadu knows, all of the cyber work that we have going on within the college is provided by Brazil. And I want the nations here within the Inter-American Defense Board to know It would be far beneficial for Brazil to take all of these resources back and apply them to the same cyber threats that Brazil faces every day. But instead, Brazil is embracing exactly what I just said. Brazil cares about the defense of the entire hemisphere. We have to work together. We have to cooperate and share information. So rather than just worry about Brazil, Brazil is here today in Washington, D.C. Brazil is here with us to make us all stronger. Because if we're not all focused on cybersecurity, none of us will be safe. So thank you for your leadership from the country of Brazil, General Flavio, General Cadu. It can only be achieved through cooperation. I want to thank the board for those who put this together, this amazing opportunity for us to have this conversation. And I want to thank you, all of you who are participating today. Thank you for this opportunity, General.
General Highcamp, on behalf of the Organization of the American States and the Inter-American Defense Board, I want to express our gratitude for your participation in our event. Thank you very much. Apresentamos agora o primeiro palestrante do nosso evento, o general Luiz Carlos de Souza, chefe do Centro de Defesa Cibernética do Exército Brasileiro, que nos brinda com sua participação a partir de São Paulo, Brasil. Sua palestra terá como tema a resiliência cibernética, construindo defesas robustas contra ameaças emergentes. General Luiz Carlos, é um prazer para a Junta Interamericana de Defesa receber suas palavras aqui na sala do Conselho de Delegados da Junta Interamericana de Defesa e retransmiti-las para a América. Seja muito bem-vindo. Por favor, General Luiz Carlos, a audiência é sua.
Bom dia a todos os participantes que nos acompanham nesse importante evento. Saúdo, de forma especial, o Brigadeiro Flávio, General Heitkamp, General Carlos Eduardo. Para mim, representando...
General, solicito que a apresentação seja colocada no habilitado vídeo, uma vez que nós não estamos recebendo o vídeo aqui, por favor.
Positivo. Então, saúdo a todos os participantes, ressaltando nosso grande interesse em compartilhar um pouco da nossa experiência. Para a gente é uma grande satisfação apresentar um pouco do trabalho do setor cibernético. É um setor muito desafiador, para o qual a gente vem buscando a cooperação e essa palavra-chave, colaboração, que é fundamental para os nossos trabalhos. Vamos falar um pouco sobre a experiência brasileira, como é que ela vem acontecendo, para que a gente possa mostrar as oportunidades que temos de nos aproximar e compartilhar experiências. Nosso objetivo é falar um pouco sobre as estratégias para fortalecer a resiliência cibernética a nível nacional e também hemisférica. Falar sobre a cooperação para compartilhar boas práticas, melhores práticas em segurança cibernética. E falar um pouco sobre a integração de tecnologias inovadoras para melhorar a capacidade de resposta a incidentes cibernéticos. Diariamente, todos nós estamos vivenciando a crescente vulnerabilidade. A tecnologia tem nos trazido outros desafios e, para tanto, a gente tem que, para utilizá-la, saber ter um nível mínimo de segurança. É nesse enfoque que vamos apresentar o nosso trabalho. Para termos uma ambientação sobre o Brasil, nós temos uma área em torno de 8,5 milhões de quilômetros quadrados. É o quinto maior país do mundo, cerca de 214 milhões de habitantes. E temos em torno de 245 milhões de equipamentos que têm acesso à internet. É mais do que um equipamento por pessoa, além de computadores, notebooks e tablets, que gira em torno de 216 milhões. E o Brasil tem caminhado de forma muito intensa na parte do governo digital. Então, hoje, pelo Banco Mundial, a gente recebeu essa informação, que o Brasil é o segundo país no ranking mundial, quase 200 países, que oferece ao cidadão o serviço digital. Então, nós temos no Brasil o Gov.br, no qual qualquer cidadão pode ter acesso a diversos serviços. Importante, só que isso abre um grande campo para ser alvo de ataques. Há de se destacar que o Brasil hoje é o segundo maior alvo de ataques no mundo. Então, temos que constantemente lidar com essa situação e buscar a cada dia a colaboração para que a gente consiga aí, ter uma defesa muito sólida. A União Internacional de Telecomunicações, uma agência das Nações Unidas, ela publicou recentemente um score, um ranqueamento dos países que possuem o nível de segurança mais adequado, aqueles que possuem estruturas, rotinas e procedimentos que o destacam na questão de segurança cibernética. A destacar ali, a se ressaltar os Estados Unidos como o primeiro ranqueado, temos o Canadá na 8ª posição e o Brasil aparece ali na 18ª posição. Nos orgulha, mas também nos encoraja a enfrentar esses desafios e buscar compartilhar essas informações, esses procedimentos e absorver, diante desses novos desafios e essas vulnerabilidades que nos batem à porta todo dia, quais são as melhores práticas. E eu falar um pouco sobre o Brasil. O Brasil, em 2009, 2008, trabalhou sobre a sua Estratégia Nacional de Defesa. E nessa estratégia foi delimitado muito claro os setores de atuação. A Marinha do Brasil coube o setor nuclear, a Força Aérea Brasileira, o setor aeroespacial, e ao Exército, a liderança do setor cibernético. Desde então, a gente vem trabalhando nessa área e juntando esforços com a Marinha, com a Força Aérea, para podermos, então, buscar esse estado de excelência. A nível de conhecimento, como é que o Brasil está estruturado o seu setor cibernético? O Gabinete de Segurança Institucional da Presidência da República, ele é o grande guarda-chuva, ele abrange o nível político, as legislações, toda a parte administração e dá as regras para que a gente possa operar dentro do nosso país. No nível estratégico, nós temos o Ministério da Defesa, o chefe de Estado-Maior das Forças Armadas e também as forças, o Exército, a Marinha, a Força Aérea. Eles estão trabalhando mais na defesa cibernética, é a nossa área de atuação. Descendo para o nível operacional, temos então o Comando Conjunto, Comando de Defesa Cibernética, o Comando Conjunto permanentemente ativado e voltado mais para a guerra cibernética. E no nível tático, também os destacamentos, as forças conjuntas cibernéticas para atuar nas diversas ações a nível tático. Então, o Comando de Defesa Cibernética ele atua no nível estratégico, no nível operacional e no nível tático, dando essa capacidade, integrando dentro do nosso país essa capacidade cibernética. Para conhecer como é que o nosso Comando de Defesa Cibernética está estruturado, nós temos hoje o Centro de Coordenação de Operações Cibernéticas, que é chefiado por 2 estrelas da Força Aérea Brasileira, general de 2 estrelas, o Centro de Gestão e Estratégia, que é chefiado por um almirante 2 estrelas, coordena toda a parte de gestão estratégica, e temos aqui uma Escola Nacional de Defesa Cibernética que procura desenvolver as capacidades, tanto a nível técnico, mas a nível tático também. E o braço operacional do comando, que é o Centro de Defesa Cibernética, que está desdobrado com seus meios, suas estruturas, para atuar nessas áreas do Comando de Defesa Cibernética. Então, é o braço operacional do comando, para conhecer e para ter uma noção de como é o nosso modus de operação. E é um pouco da nossa história. Então, depois da Estratégia Nacional de Defesa, nós tivemos uma grande evolução do setor, assim como o mundo todo progrediu nessa área, e algo que nos facilitou bastante, que nos fez trazer alguma experiência e integração e essa palavra também é muito importante, a integração, foram os grandes eventos que o Brasil pôde participar. Então, a Rio+20, a Jornada Mundial da Juventude, a Copa das Confederações de 2013, a Copa do Mundo 2014 e os Jogos Olímpicos 2016. Esses eventos fez com que a gente pudesse nos integrar com órgãos públicos e no setor privado e desenvolver as capacidades tão importantes para ter uma defesa mais robusta e estar entendendo e acompanhando o cenário cibernético internacional. Isso é um pouco da nossa história e o percurso que o Brasil tem trilhado ao longo desses anos. Bem, um assunto importante, aqui o Gabinete de Segurança Institucional do Brasil, há um decreto número 11.200 que faz menção ao Plano Nacional de Segurança de Infraestruturas Críticas. Então, capitaneando a segurança e coordenando, tá, as vulnerabilidades dentro do setor. E dentro desse escopo, desse Plano Nacional, o Comando de Defesa Cibernética tem um papel preponderante, que é organizar exercícios, organizar ligação e compartilhamento de informações para que a gente possa estar sempre atuando de forma sinérgica e sempre nos antecipando às nossas vulnerabilidades. Feito isso, nós vemos desde 2018 desenvolvendo e aprimorando o nosso exercício chamado Exercício Guardião Cibernético. E eu vou passar um pequeno resumo da 5ª edição que ocorreu agora em outubro do mês passado, aqui no Brasil, em Brasília, e depois eu vou tecer alguns comentários ampliando esse detalhamento sobre o nosso exercício.
In October 2023, the 5th edition of the Cyber Guardian exercise took place. This exercise is dedicated to the protection of critical infrastructure of national defense interest. The exercise aims to contribute to the integration between the executive branch, the private sector, and the academic community to protect the national cyberspace. It brings together the armed forces, partner organizations, academic institutions, and representatives of strategic sectors of the following areas: water, energy, nuclear, transportation, communications, finance, biosafety and bioprotection, defense, and digital government. About 150 organizations and companies with over 500 civilian and military participants are adopting protocols to address cyber incidents. Several authorities, including the Minister of Defense, foreign officials, and members of the Ibero-American Cyber Defense Foreign Forces, visited the event. The exercise aims to achieve significant outcomes for the states and society, including increased collaboration among cyber sector, stakeholders, and enhanced cyber resilience. The Cyber Guardian exercise is an important step towards making Brazil safer in cyberspace.
Bom, isso aqui é um pouco da evolução do exercício. Ele teve início em 2018 e naquele momento nós tivemos cerca de 23 organizações participando, em torno de 105 participantes, e o foco foi no setor financeiro, nuclear e setor de defesa. E ao longo dos anos fomos agregando outros participantes, ampliando o escopo do exercício e tratando de forma mais integrada essa capacitação voltada no compartilhamento de boas práticas, integração, procedimentos, infraestrutura e técnicas que facilitam e que robusteçam a nossa defesa cibernética. Em 2022, nós tivemos, então, cerca de 120 organizações, 450 participantes, e nesse ano de 2023, nós trabalhamos em outro local, utilizamos a Escola Superior de Defesa, sediada em Brasília, e foi criado também um hub em São Paulo. Então, a gente trabalhou de forma integrada e permitindo que diversos atores pudessem atuar e participar desse nosso evento. Então, falamos sobre o governo digital, energia, água, transportes, biossegurança, bioproteção, parte de defesa, setor financeiro, que é um setor que investe muito, é alvo de diversos ataques, comunicações. Então, e a grande questão desse exercício que ele não se reduz a uma semana. Nós vamos tratando ao longo ao longo do ano, né? É poder estreitar os laços e compartilhar boas práticas. Em 2023, nós tivemos cerca de 150 organizações, em torno de 15 e 20 participantes. Tivemos participação internacional do CCDCOI, que é o Centro de Referência de Excelência da OTAN, o FIC, que eu vou falar um pouco mais à frente, que é o Fórum Interamericano de Cibernética, e diversos setores colaborando e tendo aquele fórum para poder fortalecer essa ligação que tem que existir nos setores para fortalecer a nossa resistência, nossa resiliência. A academia esteve presente, a Escola de Comando Estadual do Exército, Instituto Militar de Engenharia e outras universidades de renome no Brasil, e trabalhando nesses setores que eu falei, energia, com as agências reguladoras, transporte, comunicações, biossegurança, bioproteção, setor nuclear, setor financeiro, estrutura de água e o hub aqui em São Paulo. A grande questão é a credibilidade e a confiança que se teve, que se tem nas Forças Armadas para entrar e sentarmos juntos, privados, setores privado e público, e ter uma confiança e compartilhar boas práticas. E as Forças Armadas, ela tem, dentro do nosso país, aqui, essa confiança e pôde conduzir, vem conduzindo essa atividade de forma tão importante a todos os nossos atores. Nós trabalhamos numa chamada pública para aquelas empresas que quisessem apresentar suas infraestruturas, pudessem compartilhar e pudessem participar do exercício. Então, feita uma chamada pública, foram trabalhadas simulações virtuais, cenários, infraestrutura, a parte de publicidade e o sistema de comando e controle. Esses foram alguns parceiros que se apresentaram para colaborar nesse exercício. E ano a ano a gente segue essa mesma rotina. E durante o evento, nós também trouxemos o Fórum Ibero-Americano de Cibernética, o nosso FIC. Então, trabalhamos ali com esse fórum, compartilhamos e trouxemos observadores para que a gente possa, então, nos integrar e mostrar um pouco do trabalho que está sendo feito, né? E fazendo com que essas boas práticas elas possam ser seguidas e compartilhadas. Um dos exemplos ali é o MISP, que é uma ferramenta, foi criada uma estrutura específica para esses participantes e a gente compartilha diversos procedimentos na área técnica. O FIC hoje, o Brasil, é o secretário pro tempore e tem coordenado essas atividades. Então, foi realizado simultaneamente, nesse período, na primeira semana de outubro, no Guardião Cibernético, esse fórum no Brasil para acompanhar esse nosso exercício. Quais são as áreas que foram trabalhadas? Uma simulação construtiva, um estudo de grupo, um gabinete nacional de crise, como a gente vai trabalhar, e o Gabinete de Segurança Institucional da Presidência da República liderou esse trabalho, e uma simulação virtual, com elementos mais técnicos. Então, foi feito um somatório de eventos para que a gente pudesse trabalhar com a direção das companhias, o departamento de telecomunicações, de TI, o departamento de direito, a parte legal, e ver como é que cada setor desse, cada área, tanto empresarial quanto pública, tem como reagir aos diversos incidentes que foram simulados. Então, como reagir? Como uma empresa já reagiu? Como compartilhar diante desses desafios, que é enfrentar, sim, um ataque, uma vulnerabilidade, um ransomware, e assim poder proceder, tanto a nível técnico, mas também a nível gerencial, os procedimentos para poder agir diante dessa ameaça, dessa vulnerabilidade. Então, o exercício teve essa finalidade. E aqui ele foi realizado, como falei, em São Paulo e em Brasília, nosso exercício de 2023. E aqui foi planejamento ao longo do ano, reuniões, a gente reunia, apresentava e com os diversos setores quais eram as vulnerabilidades, quais são as melhores práticas, e dessa forma preparávamos os incidentes, compartilhávamos as melhores práticas, e aí construímos uma argamassa mais fortalecida para enfrentar esses desafios que são os ataques cibernéticos. Então, foram 5 dias de exercício, foram feitas apresentações, problemas simulados, problemas técnicos, e a gente trabalhou na simulação virtual, e na simulação construtiva. É um pouco daquilo que foi feito ao longo dessa semana e um pouco do suporte que foi estabelecido, como foi feito, o portal que foi aberto, questão do e-mail, as notícias, como reagir, como apresentar a solução na mídia. Importante a reputação da instituição, como ela vai ficar abalada diante de uma vulnerabilidade, qual a resposta diante de um problema, a simulação virtual mais técnica, a simulação construtiva, e esse foi um pouco do nosso trabalho. E a gente fala um pouco dessa integração, nós chamamos a tríplice hélice, o governo com suas agências, a parte de defesa, o setor público, o setor privado e a academia, fazendo essa junção, permitindo que a gente consiga apresentar, sim, soluções integradas para fortalecer nosso sistema de segurança cibernética. Ao longo desse trabalho, a gente apresentou uns livros com melhores práticas sobre trabalho remoto, furto celular, de redes sociais, principais códigos maliciosos, e compartilhamos essas boas práticas internamente no nosso país. Diversas autoridades estiveram presentes, o ministro da Defesa, comandante do Exército, chefe do Estado-Maior Conjunto das Forças Armadas, ministro-chefe do Gabinete de Segurança Institucional, autoridades do CCDCO e da OTAN, e foi muito interessante acompanhar a integração, essa modelagem que o Brasil tem seguido para poder compartilhar. E eu volto a falar sobre a chave do nosso trabalho. O foco do nosso trabalho é a cooperação. O exercício do Guardião Cibernético, ele sempre é reestruturado, reavaliado com as demandas que diariamente a gente recebe, e o Fórum também ibero-americano serve para a gente atuar de forma integrada, compartilhando e nos unindo contra essas vulnerabilidades. E hoje, o nosso mapa mundial, a gente pode observar, ele tem mudado. A conectividade, esse mapa mostra os cabos submarinos, integrando os continentes. Então, são momentos diferentes. E para combater essas vulnerabilidades, a palavra-chave tem que ser cooperação. É dentro desse viés que o Brasil tem trabalhado e buscado dia a dia compartilhar e integrar essas informações para robustecer a nossa defesa. Bom, dessa forma, diante do tempo que nos foi reservado, apresentamos o que o Brasil está fazendo, quais são os próximos passos, e estamos de portas abertas para ampliar essa nossa cooperação. Ainda pela manhã, na manhã de ontem, estávamos com uma equipe do Comando Sul dos Estados Unidos, trabalhando sobre as oportunidades de integração e cooperação. Essas são palavras de excelência, na qual nós estamos a cada dia buscando nos fortalecer, que a gente tem visto no cenário mundial. Cada dia são novos ataques, diferentes técnicas, táticas e procedimentos. Então, estar atento ao ambiente cibernético e buscando uma capacidade de resposta, essa tem sido o nosso maior desafio e para a qual nós temos que nos fortalecer para buscar essa solução. Eu agradeço e fico agora à disposição para as perguntas que, porventura, forem apresentadas após essa minha apresentação.
General Luiz Carlos, muito obrigado por sua apresentação, na qual conhecemos uma visão sobre a resiliência cibernética, construindo defesas robustas contra ameaças emergentes. Na sua apresentação, o senhor destacou alguns aspectos relevantes. Apresentou os benefícios e possibilidades que o atual nível de conectividade nos trouxe, mas também ressaltou que o nível e a quantidade de ameaças cibernéticas acompanhou esse crescimento. Também tratou de temas relacionados com integração, confiança, resiliência no ambiente cibernético. E também apresentou a estrutura de proteção do Brasil para fazer frente a esses desafios. Algumas perguntas que nos passam. Considerando o trabalho aqui da JID, qual a importância da cooperação internacional na promoção da resiliência cibernética de uma nação?
Bem, como eu falei, é fundamental que a gente possa estar integrado, e para essa integração existe a palavra chamada confiança. Essa proximidade, o entendimento sobre essas capacidades e o compartilhamento das melhores práticas é fundamental. É uma maneira da gente entender como os inimigos nós falamos assim do espaço cibernético, os atores que atuam no espaço cibernético, buscando atingir as nossas vulnerabilidades, como a gente pode nos fortalecer. Então, o caminho é compartilhamento de boas práticas, desenvolver exercícios conjuntos e nos integrarmos para termos uma resposta efetiva. Nós sabemos que diariamente estamos trabalhando diante dessas ameaças, particularmente, faço menção aqui ao Brasil, o setor financeiro, e também de forma rápida, a resposta é fundamental. E o compartilhamento desses procedimentos, alguns sistemas que estão sendo usados, as melhores práticas, é fundamental. Então, como eu digo, o caminho é esse, né? Nos integrarmos, compartilharmos para que possamos estar fortalecidos diante dessas vulnerabilidades que nos batem à porta dia a dia.
Algumas perguntas que nos foram trazidas pelo nosso chat apresentam um interesse bastante grande nos produtos que foram apresentados no exercício Guardião Cibernético. A nossa pergunta é: de que maneira os países da América podem aplicar as lições aprendidas a partir do exercício Guardião Cibernético?
O exercício do Guardião Cibernético ele tem uma parte técnica e uma parte gerencial. E o Brasil está de portas abertas para ter a interação e poder trabalharmos juntos, porque as experiências estão sendo desenvolvidas no Brasil, são sempre fundamentais e atuam de forma a poder ser compartilhada e integrada com todos aqueles que assim o quiserem. Nós já temos esse fórum ibero-americano de cibernética, temos a visita de outros atores e o objetivo é esse, compartilhar. O Brasil está sempre de portas abertas e é um ator que busca, sim, a palavra cooperação para nos integrarmos. Aqueles que quiserem visitar, trabalharmos, vislumbrar oportunidade de integração, o Brasil permanece de portas abertas. E para a gente é uma grande honra podermos estarmos juntos nesses desafios.
General, agora a pergunta vai com relação à resiliência cibernética. Em suas perspectivas, qual é o desafio mais significativo para atingir a resiliência cibernética de uma organização?
Eu acho que todos nós estamos vulneráveis a ataques. Dia a dia a gente tem acompanhado infraestruturas críticas, os conflitos mundiais têm nos apresentado isso. A gente tem que buscar uma resposta rápida, uma atuação integrada, de tal maneira que a gente consiga manter as estruturas básicas necessárias para um país, porque nós vivemos hoje conectados e não se concebe não utilizar toda essa infraestrutura que o espaço cibernético nos permite. Então, o grande desafio nosso é ter uma resposta imediata, estarmos preparados às diferentes modalidades de ataque. Lógico, a cada dia temos observado diferentes ativos maliciosos, buscando vulnerabilidades nos diversos setores, e para tal nós temos que estar atentos às atualizações de sistemas, mas também estarmos prontos para ter uma resposta imediata. Então, é fundamental que tenhamos uma estrutura de pronta resposta para não perdermos ali a intenção da atuação nossa nos diversos setores.
General Luiz Carlos, apesar da importância e do interesse dos temas tratados pelo senhor nessa apresentação, o tempo destinado ao nosso debate está encerrado. Em nome da Organização dos Estados Americanos e da Junta Interamericana de Defesa, quero expressar nosso agradecimento pelo trabalho em prol da defesa cibernética, por sua participação em nosso evento e pela excelência da apresentação realizada. Muito obrigado.
Que agradeço e permanecemos de portas abertas. É uma grande honra, uma satisfação e um privilégio. Saudações a todos. Muito obrigado pela oportunidade.
Apresentamos agora o próximo palestrante do nosso evento, Coronel Blanc, que nos agracia com sua presença nas instalações da Casa do Soldado. O senhor Coronel Blanc é chefe de operações do Estado-Maior das Forças Cibernéticas Canadenses e nos brindará com a apresentação intitulada Cooperação na Cibernética Atual, Lições Aprendidas e Melhores Práticas. Coronel, É um prazer para a Junta Interamericana de Defesa recebê-lo aqui na Casa do Soldado. Seja muito bem-vindo. Please, Colonel Blank, the floor is yours.
General Flavo, board members, distinguished guests and cybersecurity experts, cyber defenders, representatives of the armed forces, policymakers, and industry leaders, good morning. Let me start off with the first slide, which is going to talk about cyber operations at the speed of trust. And this is an important aspect of our lessons learned and our observations in conducting some of our operations today. So first off, I would like to say thank you on behalf of the Canadian Armed Forces Cyber Force Commander, Rear Admiral Caroselli, for having us here today to discuss cyber operations. It is always a privilege to speak at events like these, since it also provides an opportunity to share our experiences and to also foster discussions. To give you an example of the size and scope, as you can see there, the entire leadership on the operational side is on that screen. We have the Rear Admiral, we have Brigadier General Yarker and myself, a very small leadership cadre leading our forces that are responsible for cyber operations, SIGINT, and joint electronic warfare. As the Chief of Staff of Operations, it is my responsibility to bring strategic coherence and unity of effort to a complex and rapidly evolving domain for my nation's military cyber forces in order to defend our networks and our information technology, both at home and globally deployed. Cyberspace is critical when conducting modern military operations, as we've heard earlier in our presentations, and this is why the Canadian Armed Forces defends its own networks. And just to give you an example of what that looks like, it's over 250 networks that we currently have right now. Our adversaries have demonstrated sophisticated cyber espionage and offensive cyber capabilities for use in competition, crisis, and conflict. Indeed, potential adversaries are developing and leveraging cyber capabilities to attempt to exploit vulnerabilities in our command and control communication systems, our computers, our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems. In addition to the threat posed by state actors, we're seeing a variety of proxies, inspired individuals, with many of them with different motivations, cyber criminals, hacktivists, terrorists, thrill seekers, and even a potential insider threat that will continue to increasingly sophisticated means to disrupt our networks. We must therefore continue to make the necessary efforts to not only keep up with the threat, but also stay ahead of them to fight and win in this ever-changing, human-made, man-made terrain, which is very different than the other domains that we have out there. Furthermore, given the borderless nature of cyber threats, it is all important that we be engaged in the world with allies and partners. Okay. So what do we do? First of all, it's a small, oh, I think I went too fast here. I think I got it. All right, so first of all, we are a small and growing cyber force. We're still in the early stages of getting our command and control construct right, of developing our force generation processes, our force management processes in place, and to be able to support the greater CAF construct. As I mentioned, with over 240 networks, we're extremely busy. And we don't do this by ourselves. We work with allies and partners, but we also work with an interagency construct. So what does that lead to is what is our mission? If you see on the slide here in the top left-hand corner, we conduct full spectrum cyber operations to include offensive, defensive, cybersecurity cooperation, capacity building, and we do that in close coordination with allies, partners, and host nations. This is critical, which leads us to our actual operational priorities. First of all, to defend those networks, we have a security operations center that's manned by the military, and that works 24/7, making sure that we have full situational awareness on all of our networks. That's always a challenge when you have so many. And it's not just at home, but it's also deployed abroad. Our first set of priorities, again, is homeland defense, defense of our own networks to ensure the effective command and control for senior leadership. The next is our support to other government departments and partners in the cybersecurity incident response construct from a national perspective. And Major General Carlos mentioned that. He kind of showed how in Brazil they do the whole of government approach. We do the same thing. Lots of national security and intelligence partners are involved in this effort. The next, of course, is our support to Government of Canada and the Chief of Defence Staff in the delivery of cyber effects. We've been delivering those effects now for quite some time, and the intent here is to ensure that we meet the Government of Canada's strategic priorities when it comes to cyber operations and the Chief of Defence Staffs. We also support operational level commanders, our special operations forces, our joint command organizations, and our services, Army, Navy, Air Force, etc. And of course, no less important is support to allies and partners, which will be the focus of my observations and lessons learned a little bit later on. I will tell you that none of the success that we've had currently on operations would be there without our interagency work and our work with key partners, especially our Communication Security Establishment and our Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, which actually deploys on most of our operations with us, just to give you an idea of how that approach has taken place. Okay, let's talk a little bit about operations today. Right now, as I speak, the Canadian Armed Forces Cyber Forces are executing persistent cyber and SIGINT operations in support of the government. We are globally engaged, and we do this through standing cyber task forces. These task forces, and the first one I'll talk about is actually focused on the Ukraine. That task force has been in existence now for over almost 700 days. That one was stood up after the invasion in Eastern Europe, and it's designed to provide security support and assistance to our Ukrainian friends. That task force operates 24/7. It assists our Ukrainian counterparts against malicious activity and adversarial activity, and is manned by a permanent team of folks. That's been a very successful operation for us, and it also allows us to share best practices, lessons learned, licenses, software, TTPs, and subject matter expertise. The next task force we have is in support of Latvia, and that's a persistent task force that's actually geographically located in Latvia, and is conducting joint threat hunts with our Latvian partners. Another operation that's been on the go for about 700 days now. That operation, to give you an idea of what cyber speed looks like, started off as a small team going forward, linking up with the host nation, developing a request for support, and then deploying soldiers forward to be able to assist. All that took place in 6 days. So from the initial request to a reconnaissance element being on the ground, to national agreements to how to stand up this task force and to start operations was all done within 6 days. This is the speed of cyber that we need to do when we're working with allies and partners. Now, we also have task forces dedicated to continental defense and support to NORAD. And we have task forces that are in the early stages of being stood up to work in the Indo-Pacific region. And for us, we've looked at this through the global lens. And even though cyber knows no geography, we have had to focus kind of from a regional construct. So what have been some of the lessons learned coming out of these operations? Number one, relationships and trust are the master keys. This means investment in liaison officers. This means face-to-face meetings. This means travel. And I say that because you cannot establish trust in the cyber domain through a computer screen. You can only do it face-to-face. And that's been our experiences in setting up multiple task forces out there. Hence why I'm here today. Why I decided that it was better to come here and actually do it face-to-face than try to do it through a system. And I have no excuse. We're only an hour and a half away. The speed of trust with partners is also critical to success. Remember, it is their network. It is their vulnerability. It is their compromise. We are there in a supporting role to that incident. We have been mostly successful at coming in at the tactical and operational level with our partners and allies not always at the strategic level from the top. And the reason I say that is that sometimes when we've attempted to try to develop relationships with allies and partners, and we've gone through the normal process of coming through our policy, our legal constructs, etc., it took a long time. You know, the bureaucracies of governments is slow. However, when we're able to come in at the tactical and operational level, have those discussions, it was our partners and our allies that sold the value and the criticality of the mission to their own leadership, making it a lot easier to get concurrence, to be able to do things in a joint manner. We also took a little bit different approach than some nations. We took a very deliberate and incremental approach to establishing that trust. We went in, a lot of times we probably started with networks and doing hunt operations on networks that might not have been critical, but as we worked together, we developed that trust. It got more and more complex, and we're able to work on more and more sensitive systems based on the needs of our partners. So the other aspect of that is that we made a commitment that we weren't going to come in, do a short-term activity and then leave, that we were going to develop an enduring relationship. And when we think that's been key to our success. I mentioned a couple of those task forces. There are others, but that's been the key to our success. The other issue was the depth of the relationship. You know, you can do a lot of work sometimes on some of the networks that are not as critical for the partner, might be more important from our perspective, but at the end of the day, it was our abilities to be persistent versus episodic. And like I said, they're trying to build that depth into the infrastructure that we're trying to protect. We've used a task force construct. We did not have set organizations that we deployed forward for these task forces. We built every single task force differently. We made sure there was a command and control element. There was a real life support element, a intelligence element to this. And then we decided based on the needs of the partner and what we were looking at as to how that element below that, is it more software engineers? Is it more forensics? Is it more cyber analysts? And we determined what that would look like. So every single task force is task tailored for the missions that are going out there. And those task forces would not be successful that are forward deployed without strong and effective reach back to the enterprise back in Ottawa. At the end of the day, we can only put a very small presence forward, but the real bulk of work on the intelligence side, on the systems side, takes place back home. And so that connectivity, that reach back is critical for supporting the deployed task forces. The other aspect that's been critical is the use of off-the-shelf technology. We've spent millions of dollars developing high-speed tools for the cyber domain, but the reality is the majority of the time we are using off-the-shelf technology, which has proven faster, cheaper, and easier to use, especially when dealing with allies and partners. Of course, when we download that software, we make sure it's safe. We might modify it using our software engineers and then reinstitute it and use it as a tool. But that's what has been worked for us so far in some of our task forces. The other issue that's been critical is the employment of smart officers and soldiers and operators who have inquisitive minds, that are well educated and understand this very complex domain. We're always dealing with wicked problems, and they need to be able to adapt quickly, because when we're working with allies and partners, the networks that we're working on sometimes are very dissimilar to the experiences that they have had working back home. Again, I mentioned it earlier, but the reach back capability is critical, but also our abilities to bring whole of government partners with us on these operations. As I mentioned, I would say a big part of our success has been able for us to bring folks from the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, maybe some folks from other organizations that are non-traditional in the cyber domain, because they always bring certain authorities, skill sets, capabilities, or tools to the cyber task force. And I'll be honest with you, we have learned by doing. We've participated in hundreds of exercises, but at the end of the day, it seemed to be very repetitive. Where we think we've had success and where we've been able to grow the cyber force has been in actually conducting operations, getting out there, getting after the problem, dealing with real adversaries in the cyber domain, learning about those adversaries, and then modifying and changing our approach. So we're learning by doing. And we don't just learn about the adversaries, we learn about ourselves, our gaps, our challenges, but we also learn about our allies and partners and where they have gaps and challenges and capacity issues that we might be able to assist in. I will tell you one of the issues where we are still struggling, and this is the integration of private and public and industry into our cyber task forces. We're not there yet. We are continuing to work on that challenge. Difficult for us from a security clearance perspective, also from a ability to integrate them into our deployed elements around the world. But we are continuing to figure out how we're going to bring the industry and that private public relationship into the fight. So as was mentioned by the previous speakers, we're not alone. And the key to what we believe to some of our success has been ensuring that we have shared awareness, shared understanding, and unity of effort in our cyber operations. We've invested a lot in this space, and we will continue to do so going forward. So I'll pause there and just mention that I'd like to thank the organizers for this event. I know there's a lot of work that goes on in this space, and I'm happy to transition into questions because I think that's where the real discussion will be and having some conversations about our experiences in this fight.
All right. Federico Norblanc, thank you for your presentation, which gained insight into cooperation in contemporary cyber warfare, lessons learned, and best practices. Your presentation was particularly emphatic in the following topics: mission of the Canadian Cyber Force and priorities adopted in mission execution. You especially emphasized the lessons learned while operation in cyber activities. According to the presentation, you said the relationships and trust are critical, and you also showed real cyber operations and special partners that we have. We have received also some questions from Angela Carrasco Joffre from Chile. What is the question? What kind of barriers can be found from the countries to enter in a joint system to act in cyber defense? Joining all this information, I will give you some questions. Based on the lessons learned from recent conflicts, what is the opinion on the establishment of a hemispheric cooperation framework for cyber defense in Americas?
Look, I think anytime we have the opportunity to...
I think this one's better.
Okay, I'll take that one. I think if we build any type of constructs to bring cyber experts and national security experts together, it's a good thing. However, I will caution that a lot of times when you're conducting cyber operations with allies and partners, one of the key aspects of this is that they might not be comfortable doing it in a multinational construct, that they might be more comfortable in doing it in a bilateral construct because of intelligence sharing, information sharing, etc. So I would say that having some type of coordination construct is good. It's a start point for conversations. It allows us the sharing of best practices, lessons learned, and of course, as I spoke about earlier, learning from each other, but it might be the conduit to the establishment of bilateral operational activity.
Thank you so much for this information. And we have also another question. From past lessons learned, which do you believe is the most critical for implementation by the countries in the Americas with fewer resources from cyber defense?
I think it was mentioned by the previous two speakers, General Carlos, General Heinkamp, mentioned the issues of teamwork. We are not alone. We need to be able to work together. We need to figure out how to share information and sometimes intelligence at the speed of cyber. That is difficult in some certain constructs, but I think that's the key. If we're going to have effective teamwork, we need to figure out how we're going to share information very quickly and what those mechanisms are going to be. We're going to have to sometimes maybe even accept some risk in achieving those effects.
And what, in your opinion, is the most crucial interpersonal characteristic that should be trained in cyber defense personnel?
I'm not a training expert, but my experience in seeing the team working on all these challenges and problem sets is that a baseline, a very solid baseline of education is critical for our cyber officers and our cyber operators. It's a lot more than most people realize. Imagine having cyber officers that require a 4-year undergraduate degree, another 2 years in a master's degree in computer science or software engineering or artificial intelligence or machine learning. So that's 6 years of education, then probably another 2 years of training, and then some experience on top of that. We're talking about, to develop a cyber officer, about 8 years of investment. That's significant. And there's the same for our non-commissioned members. A significant amount of investment in education and training. That's part one. Part two is, as I said before, is getting them out, doing operations. They learn 10 times faster and more, and with some significant amount of relevance to that learning when they're doing the operations. And then the last point I would mention is we need to have members of the cybersecurity and cyber defense team be inquisitive minds, folks that want to tackle the wicked challenges and the problems that are out there, folks that are going to go and probably take sometimes a non-traditional approach to looking at a problem set. Because as you know, in the military, we have, as we go up through our training over the years, we have normally a very set kind of construct of how to look at things. We need folks that are prepared to think outside the box. And that's tough, especially in the military construct sometimes.
Thank you so much. Now I will go to the question of Angela Carrasco Joffre again. Okay, she said, what are the big barriers that the countries can find to act together?
I think the barriers are trust. At the end of the day, one of the challenges we have is how do we establish that trust? And this board is a good example of an instrument, an entity that's designed to try to establish that trust, break down those barriers of communication, and be able to work together. So it's continuous conversations, continuous engagement, especially in this very important domain, to establish that trust, establish those relationships, investment, like I said, in liaison officers, investment in personnel to make sure that we can establish that trust and those relationships. That's what we need to ensure that we break down.
Perfect. And we saw a lot of lessons learned. How the countries can use the experience of Canada in that lessons learned.
Look, I would just say from a Canadian perspective, we're a small country, especially in population size, and we are still learning. And I will tell you that I don't think we have all the answers at all. I think we are in the early stages of learning about this domain in depth based on our operational experiences. And I don't think that it is dissimilar from any of you here in the room or any of the nations participating in the conference today. We are all learning by doing. We just have one view of things, but we're learning a lot. And I think we are happy to share our experiences and our lessons learned with our allies and our partners. I think that's critical.
Colonel Blank, despite the remaining questions, our time for discussions has has come to an end. Colonel Blank, your insights have been invaluable. On behalf of the Organization of the American States and the Inter-American Defense Board, I want to express our gratitude for your work in the field of cyber defense, your participation in our event, and the excellence of the presentation delivered. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Apresentamos o próximo palestrante de nosso evento, doutora Agnes Casper, que é chefe da área de Direito do Centro de Excelência em Defesa Cibernética Cooperativa da OTAN, e nos agracia com sua presença nas instalações da Casa do Soldado. Nessa Conferência Hemisférica de Defesa Cibernética, a doutora Agnes apresentará uma palestra intitulada Ciberdiplomacia, Desafios e Oportunidades para a Cooperação Hemisférica. Doutora Agnes, é um prazer para a Junta Interamericana de Defesa recebê-la aqui na Casa do Soldado, no Conselho de Delegados. Seja muito bem-vinda. Estamos prontos para a sua apresentação. Please, Dr. Agnes Casper, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Good morning. First of all, thank you very much for the kind invitation, and thank you very much for the organizers to allowing and giving me the opportunity to speak about this important topic here today. So today I will talk about, sorry, I'm just trying to figure this out. Yeah, okay. This one is working. There. Okay. No. There is a bit. Okay. Okay. Now, okay. I'm figuring out the technology as well here in real time. So there are already challenges here. So very quickly, I would like to say that I'm not talking on behalf of NATO. I'm not talking about on behalf of any organization. I'm here talking in private capacity. So please. There, okay, yeah, okay. So not necessarily representing the views of the NATO CCD-COE. So the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence is where I'm coming from. I'm the head of the law branch, but also interesting hearing about the educational challenges from the previous speaker. I'm also a lecturer, senior lecturer of cybersecurity and law for the last 10 years. So I'm very well aware of the challenges there. So quickly about the NATO CCD-COE. And about the presentation today, I'm going to cover a few words about cyber diplomacy and the content of cyber diplomacy, the key challenges there. So I will talk about a little bit cyber stability and international norms, but my main points are going to concern international law and how it applies in cyberspace, and what kind of regional cyber diplomacy efforts I encountered in the regions that I'm mostly interacting with, and what might be interesting for the future. So quickly about the NATO's Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence. Imagine it as a think tank, a very specialized think tank. So it's an international multidisciplinary cyber defense hub established in 2008. It's accredited by NATO, but I have to say that this is not within the NATO structure. That's an important part of the story here. So our mandate is to support our 39 nations, basically with training exercises and research. So, and usually this is the point when I'm saying that what we are not doing operations. Okay, we do quite a lot of other things, but we do not engage in cyber operations. That's not within our mandate. We cooperate with our nations, with NATO, with academia, with private sector, with many actors, yeah, and help them also stay relevant and keep the cutting edge. So you can see on this map our member nations. It goes beyond NATO. We have non-NATO member states as well here. So as I said, there are the key activities that we are doing are research, training, and exercises in 4 domains that are relevant in cyber defense. We focus on technology, we focus on strategy, operations, and law. And in this combination, we provide our research, we do research and training and our exercises. So a few flagships that you may have already encountered. For example, we are the organizers and we do the lock shields, the largest cyber defense live fire exercise. Here, of course, all of those domains and areas that I showed you before, technology, operations, strategy, and law are relevant. We have technical exercise, so there is technical part of that exercise. We have a strategy track, yeah, so decision makers get to play the game, and also we have a legal track. So we train the lawyers in relation to the scenario that we established for the purposes of the game. We also have crosswords. That's offensive focused exercise, much smaller than the lock shields. We have CyCon, the international conference we had already for 15 years. And for lawyers and those who have legal background, they will probably know the Tally manual. Yeah, that is produced on the invitation of the center, and our name is associated with Tally manual. The CCDCOE is now focusing on 5 capabilities of our members. Yeah, we help them build capability to conduct cyber operation based on common frameworks. And probably this is the most relevant focus area for my branch, the legal branch. Common frameworks. Here we can mean common legal frameworks, so translated into international law, for example, international norms and rules. But common frameworks for the technology experts, I mean common standards, for example, and technical standards, etc. So, but also we are focusing on other areas and other capability building areas, multi-domain operations, multinational combined operations in their requisites, capability of our member states to conduct military civilian cyber operations, and of course, the public-private partnerships. So you can see our activities have quite a broad reach, and there is a high level of complexity that we are trying to navigate here. And a lot of times, I find it very important to talk about all of these areas to other actors, partners, to speak up speak up about our products, our activities, and share with others in conferences like this, and in other fora as well. So where it comes, and this is where it comes to the question of cyber diplomacy in certain areas, when we're talking about relations between nations, for example, and UN negotiations. That's what most of the people call cyber diplomacy. But I also call cyber diplomacy the level of exchanges and level of relations at the technical level. You can call it diplomacy track 2.0, for example. And what we heard, that might be more effective actually than talks involving bureaucracy and policy and procedures. Nevertheless, diplomacy, cyber diplomacy, to us relates to resolving issues arising from the international use of cyberspace, and simply the tools of diplomacy and diplomatic mindset are applied. So diplomacy, cyber diplomacy may not mean completely new area or field. It's just that what the diplomats are trying to tackle, what kind of problems. So that distinguishes cyber diplomacy from other areas of diplomacy for us. So it's focusing on state behavior in cyberspace, and it's done by the traditional diplomats. If you go and look at the UN negotiations in the open-ended working group, you will find that there are classical diplomats involved in the processes. And what they're discussing, what we are also discussing and trying to have our voices heard: cyber stability and international security, international law and cyberspace, especially for my department. Fighting cybercrime is a typical item on the agenda, and engagement on the regional fora, as well as global internet governance and internet freedom. Typically, these would be, I think we would agree with many of the experts that these are the items on the agenda. Cyber stability framework, that's something that probably has the most broadest concept here. It involves international law, norms, cyber confidence building measures, capacity building. And if you are familiar with the reports and documents coming out from the UN group of governmental experts and the UN open-ended working group discussing cyber issues, you will see that the reports are structured in a similar way. They talk about capacity building, confidence building, international law, and norms all together. International law and norms can be referring to existing international law already that we already have, like the UN Charter, okay, or existing treaties. That can be non-binding, so soft laws here, or general principles, political agreements, but they share a common trait. But they express the shared expectation of behavior. So all of them talk about how should states behave in cyberspace, okay? I will come back to that a little bit later. So the idea behind that we have these common ideas about, or norms and rules about how should a state behave in cyberspace, is to reduce the risks to international peace, provide more stability, security, and I would say predictability. What can I expect from my counterpart? How, well, with some likelihood, they are going to behave or not behave. So all this contributes to prevention of conflict. So norms and existing international law complement each other in a very special way. In the reports of the UN groups, we will find norms, principles of responsible state behavior, very specific to cyberspace. On the other hand, existing international law that was, for example, made back in the 1940s, 1950s, or emerged during the last decades, may not be specific to cyberspace at all. Yeah. Now the focus is on substantiating norms and dealing with the challenges of accountability in two main global discussion forums. The first committee and in the third committee. The UN groups in the first committee have been discussing general issues that concern state behavior. And now in the third committee, and that was an initiative of the Russian Federation, there are discussions about the need and the draft of a convention, a new UN convention for cybercrime. The process of discussing the rules and norms in cyberspace, what might apply, it's been actually going on for the last 25 years. It was in 1998, the Russian Federation introduced this idea, draft resolution, and started the discussion about regulating some way cyberspace at the international level. Then discussion groups, working groups were established, and they delivered some results also, but they are also, these groups, the open-ended working group and the UN and the committees, also a place where discussions are going on, and you can see the fragmented application or fragmented approaches and the different approaches. What should be done? Should there be a new convention, or should there be a different process that might clarify the actual rules and actual norms in cyberspace? So there has been competing proposals put forth in the UN. So the principles and norms of responsible state behavior that are cyber-specific. I put here an illustrative picture here that what might we talk about. The trick about these ones is that they use the language of what should be done, what is recommended, yeah, more or less. So there is no specific enforcement mechanism if a state behaves in contravention of any of these norms, principles of responsible state behavior. However, these norms, and when they are written down and they are elaborated on, these could be the ones that may lead in the future to binding rules and binding agreements. What is the consensus right now? And I would probably be right when I say global consensus, and what is actually binding is not that much at the moment. Consensus in international law and cyberspace. The first step was made in 2013 when the government, a group of experts, agreed that international law applies in cyberspace. And then in 2015, the General Assembly actually reaffirmed and kind of agreed with this position. And pretty much that's where we are at the moment. And this is where competing proposals are coming in. International law applies, but how it applies And this is where the nations and the countries who wanted to have a say in the process, how we interpret international law, what are the actual rules when it comes down to the application? How do you apply these rules? So these are the nations so far who have expressed their positions in these matters. I think we have here something around 30 states who have what I would say comprehensive positions on how international law applies in cyberspace. However, this is where the countries cannot agree. Two competing proposals that are at the moment in the UN. Last week, it was just last week when the Russian Federation and a few like-minded nations proposed a draft resolution saying that we need a new convention, new cyber convention. The other group of states, France, US, and other like-minded states are saying and arguing that no, actually, hey, we have the rules. We just need to agree and discuss that how they apply and whether there are any gaps. Do we need some new rules? I don't know. We have not discussed it yet. So should not jump to conclusions and should not jump into creating a new convention. So this is as new as last week, another attempt or another pair of competing resolutions were introduced here. Generally, what are we talking about? We are talking about the areas of law that already are there. We have rules for these areas. And this is what the national positions are talking about. And actually, these are where some of the new proposals also want to challenge the applicability of some of the concepts, some of the basic frameworks that has been there for decades. Generally, these are the areas that the national positions cover. Now, last June, no, it was in July, when the group discussing these issues, how international law applies, etc., delivered its final 2023 report and said that we need more national views on how international law applies. So it encourages the countries to actually think about it and come up with their own national positions, saying, for example, as usually these countries start their national positions, okay, we think sovereignty applies in cyberspace this way and this way. For example, we think that sovereignty is a rule and a principle. Therefore, as a rule, it can be violated. Then, for example, continuing that, okay, due diligence applies in cyberspace this way and that way. State responsibility applies, etc. So this is something what states who have already their national positions typically would discuss. Yeah, there are many actors, many states who still are in the process of considering whether or not to come up with a comprehensive national position. For these and for others who may not even be aware of the importance of this process and of why we need these national positions, it's important that there is a forum and there is a process now established in the UN to have case-by-case discussions, scenario-based discussions when there might be more clarity on some of the legal points and what could be in these national positions, which country would prefer which approach. And this is where also the report calls for capacity building in areas of international law. So, and I would point out here that capacity building efforts and resources have already been there. So, for example, our center's project, the Tally Manual, is basically gives a very comprehensive list of possible approaches, possible interpretations, how international law and the specific rules of international law could apply to cyber operations. It's not law, it's never been, but what it is, a very useful catalog of ideas that if you open it, you can agree with the interpretation or you can disagree with the interpretations, right? So it's a useful tool, it's a useful resource for nations to actually think about their own positions, okay? Then we have already the cyber law toolkit, scenario-based resource that we are using in our trainings. We are using it in our research, in our work. This is bridging the gap between academia and practice, so training and the actual interpretation and actual application of international law. And this is free. This has been there. This is completely free. It's on the internet. It's crowdsourced approach. We have new calls for new scenarios each year. This year, 1st of December, we are waiting for new scenario proposals, which will be reviewed by a team of 30 experts. And that's where how the scenarios and the analysis behind them gets their way to the toolkit. And then we have a new initiative. And when we are talking about the new recommendation from the UN report that we need more national positions, this is where we also see at the NATO CCD-COE that we need to engage in capacity building and help assist nations. Nations also in Europe, outside Europe. Actually, this is a global issue. This is a global issue. So what we are doing, we are also want to provide guidance on actually drafting these national positions. Our experts have seen these processes. This is our field of expertise. We have 5 core partners in this project that we are starting this year. University of Exeter, Chatham House think tank in the UK, the NATO CCD-COE, and 2 governments, Japan and Estonia, engaged in this process. And we are going to have international workshops, 3 of them. We are going to have consultations with those people who have the experience and who have been in various countries already engaged in these drafting processes. And we are going to have the lessons learned from them and then give practical guidance on the procedures, on the content, on the policy dilemmas, etc., on these issues in a handbook format and in a few articles and other publications. So that's what we see. There are other cyber diplomacy efforts on the regional levels. And a few of them I just want to mention here. And this will be, again, in line with those presentations and the content what was said before. How important is trust? How important is confidence building and cooperation? For example, the OSCE already in 2016 had a recommendation that invited proposals. Okay, how can we do confidence building? What else we can do but confidence building in cyber areas? And there were many recommendations, actually very concrete proposals coming in, and the OSCE is now implementing them. I just put here the last 3 press releases from them that demonstrates or illustrates what can be done. So, for example, consultations on vulnerability, coordinated vulnerability disclosure, or they have consultations on UN Program of Actions for Cybersecurity, or here, the another one doing reports. EU has already defined its pretty clear approach to cyber diplomacy. So they put together a toolbox saying that, okay, this is how we see it, and this is what we will be doing. So can see the cyber diplomacy measures that they are using. They range from confidence and capacity building to cyber sanctions and to more forceful reactions. In theory, that this is the toolbox, and they will choose according to the needs. Of course, just need to mention here this EU and its EU cybersecurity policy is way more complex and economic focused. So there is way more to that part from the EU. And lastly, there is another regional cooperation that I like to emphasize that this is already out there. The Cybercrime Convention in the Council of Europe. That's pretty much the only one international and binding law that is cyber specific. Yeah, and it's been there since 2001, already provides on a very important and very challenging area, the fights against cybercrime, a legal framework, an international cooperation framework, and also cooperation with regard to electronic or digital evidence. It's open for countries outside of the Council of Europe, and it provides lots of other benefits, especially capacity building, but especially in the form of the second additional protocol that deals with collection and exchange of digital evidence. Yeah, that's a new protocol. Signature started from last year, and it deals in very practical term with how to address and how to collect digital evidence across jurisdictions. And here it provides a legal framework that actually says that law enforcement of one country can turn to the service provider in the private sector of another country directly if you sign this protocol. Okay? So you don't have to go through lots of bureaucratic hurdles and other questions. So few observations here. I believe that the confidence building measures at the regional level and consultations are an alternative to a new cyber treaty. Discussions, opening up, sharing the concepts, sharing approaches. Yeah, I think that would just perfectly do the job, and no need to jump into premature conclusions about the need for a new cyber treaty at the global level. So this is why the national positions are important. And here, for example, the EU is doing consultations, trying to come up with a common position on how international law applies. So, and definitely conducts consultations and coordinates with its member states. There's growing complexity here, and we heard from previous speakers about how important the non-governmental actors are and private-public consultations and projects. So, and I would also just close my presentation with saying that there are a lot of things out there already. I would find it necessary and important to build on existing achievements and ongoing projects. And I illustrated for you that what is already out there, even free tools, the cyber law toolkit, the tally manuals, and then we are doing new projects. But it's not only us, there are other actors. For example, there is the Oxford process that is also putting out a lot of material and engaged in many of these capacity building efforts. So with that, thank you very much, and I'm happy to respond to questions.
Dr. Agnes, to maintain the time, I will give the questions now, okay? The subject cyber diplomacy is quite new, comprehensive, and engagement. In this regard, how can diplomacy contribute to building a secure and resilient cyber environment in America?
Thank you very much for the question. And I think that the basic principles and basic ideas do not depend on geography. The trust and cooperation, this is not specific to the Organization of American States, what they can use to actually enhance stability and security in cyberspace. This would work exactly the same way, whether you are in Americas or in Europe or in the ASEAN region, wherever. So in that sense, it is the confidence building measures that I will always come back to. It is the coordination and consultations and cooperation, which I will always return to. Doesn't matter what region of the globe we are talking about.
Perfect. As the allotted time to question to Agnes Kasper comes to an end, we bid farewell to our speaker. Dr. Agnes Kasper, on behalf of the Organization of the American States and the Inter-American Defense Board, I want to express our gratitude for your work in the field of cyber defense, your participation in our event, and excellence of the presentation delivery. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Senhoras e senhores, passamos agora para um intervalo de 10 minutos. Senhoras e senhores, solicitamos que todos tomem assento para Tornamos agora para as atividades de nossa Conferência Hemisférica de Defesa Cibernética. Apresentamos como próximo palestrante do nosso evento, Wade Lance, que nos agracia também com sua presença nas instalações da Casa do Soldado. O senhor Wade Lance é Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, na empresa Synec, e apresentará outros aspectos relacionados à inteligência artificial, defesa cibernética e segurança cibernética. Senhor Wade Lance, é um prazer recebê-lo na Junta Interamericana de Defesa e estamos prontos para a sua apresentação. Please, Mr. Wade Lance, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. There it is. See, thank you. Good morning and welcome. We have very little time today to tackle a very large subject, which is impacting cybersecurity at all levels. So in the next 50 minutes, we're going to try to myself and Alejandro, some discussion. We're going to try to give you as much information as we can. And so we're gonna jump right into the content, and please feel free to prepare questions. Here we go. Artificial intelligence is changing the way cybersecurity is done on both sides of the fight, both the attacker process and the defender process, very, very quickly. To be fair, these engines and tools have been around for years. They've been available. The big change is the simplicity and the ease with which people can now interact with these engines. Again, both the attacker, it's easier for them to leverage artificial intelligence engines, but also the defender, which in some cases is good news, and in some cases it is bad news. So let's jump right into it. Okay. Whew. All right. While I figure out how this works, the first thing that we wanted to talk about are the basic approaches for how individuals and organizations interact with artificial intelligence engines. Now, again, there are many, many methods, but in general, there are three primary approaches that you need to be aware of. There are public engines. The artificial intelligence engine is hosted by a third party. People access that information and submit prompts into that engine, and it spits out data. There are both advantages and disadvantages to this process. Public engines are connected to very large data sets, and they learn very, very quickly. Okay. However, all of the data that is submitted into a public engine then becomes a part of the data and is queryable by anybody who knows how to interact with that engine. So if I ask the engine a question, how do I deal with this vulnerability in my environment? We have this particular CVE in our environment. What are the best fixes for that? And I do that in a way that is attributable to my organization. Another party may be able to query that engine and say, which CVEs has this organization requested information about how to manage, right? The second process is private access to a public engine. This is where you go and rent an instance of an artificial intelligence engine for your organization's use. Okay, so this leverages the strength of a public engine connected to large data sets, global data sets. It learns very quickly, but it does allow for some integrations with your data, right? The ability to leverage a public engine, but it's a little easier to connect it to your data sets. There's a less risk of third-party organizations getting access to your data, but you are responsible for any of your data that drifts its way into that engine. The third approach is the private instance. This is where, as an organization, we go out and acquire code for an AI engine to post in our environment. We are running the AI engine internally. It is very easy to connect that to my internal data sets. It will learn, but only what it learns about our organization. It is simpler to integrate that engine with our data sets. and there's a very low risk of data leaking outside your organization. So the engine is going to learn less quickly, but your security posture is much higher. Now, the reason I talk about these three approaches is because when I talk to people about how their organization is using artificial intelligence, and they say, well, we're using this engine to do this, I say, which approach are you using? Is it a fully public engine? It is a private use, a rented version of a public engine, or is it completely private? And I typically get a blank stare. They have no idea what I'm talking about. So the first step for us as security operators is to recognize that the use of artificial intelligence forever changes the way we do cybersecurity. And the first things we need to do is to determine throughout the organization which kinds of artificial intelligence are we as defenders going to allow our people to use. Okay, and management needs to make that decision. Now, you'll make that decision in cooperation with technical operators in cyber operations. But we should be having conversations immediately with people to go say, hey, management throughout your organizations should be going through cyber operations and saying, are you using artificial intelligence for your process? And if so, where? And how are you doing that? The interesting thing here is the discovery. Most management in cyber operations is completely unaware that this is their responsibility, and they have no idea the level to which their people are using AI engines. So I had a conversation with one of the people that works for me. He does training programs internally for our organization. We would record a video of a process. Here's a process that CINAC is going to use internally, security testing, sales, whatever it may be. He would use a private AI engine to pull the text, to transcribe the video into text. Then he needed to create a quiz out of the text. So he would just take the transcript of the training and dump it into an AI engine as a prompt and say, this is a training. I need 5 questions, multiple choice questions out of this with 2 to 5 answers. And I need to know which are the correct answers. And the AI engine will spit out a test in 30 seconds. It takes him 4 to 5 minutes to go edit it and make sure it's clean, and he's done. Saves hours every week. And so I said to him, okay, that content, that transcript that you're submitting to that engine, what are you doing to sanitize that data of CINAC specific information? And I got the deer in the headlights, the blank stare, no idea what I'm talking about, right? Thankfully, this was the very first week. And so in cooperation with some other people, and this is something to understand, the first script for sanitization that we came up with of the data had 5 terms in it. So he would take the script, run it through he would take the transcript, run it through a sanitization script, and it would do things like every time it ran into the word CINAC, our organization, it would replace that word with organization. So that when the data went into the AI engine, there was no way to connect the data, the submission to us as an organization. It was sanitized out, right? When we first built that sanitization script, there were 5 terms in it that we were replacing. The fun thing about that is that when the AI engine spits out the quiz, we ran the script in reverse and it just replaces the words back. Very efficient. Once we sent that script around to 3 other teams, we went from 5 terms to 13 terms. Because when different people looked at it, they realized the sensitivity of certain terms based on their expertise and domain knowledge. So, sanitization scripts. This is critical questions for you and for your people in the use of artificial intelligence in cyber operations. Who is using artificial intelligence in the organization, and are we sanitizing that data before it goes into those engines? Fair enough. Okay, so 5 quick points, and then we'll do the ever so necessary 1-minute commercial on SYNAC, and then we'll pass it on to Alejandro. So there are attacker and defender advantages. I'm looking for the clock to make sure I'm on time. There are both attacker and defender advantages. And I can say this about artificial intelligence. The way it's being used today by attackers and defenders, we don't see it replacing very many people. What is happening is that these engines are making the people that are the top level of their skill set dramatically more efficient and effective. A very sophisticated attacker can leverage a artificial intelligence ChatGPT style engine and increase their productivity and output 30, 40, 50% in short order. They will be faster and smarter. For example, as an attacker, if I get the name of an organization, maybe it's the Air Force of South American military, I get a series of names and email addresses of individuals in that organization. I can submit that into an engine saying, I want to create a spear phishing campaign against these 10 people in this organization. The engine will crawl data in the internet for the last decade, public media, news media, social media, and construct targeted spear phishing email for each of those people that are interlocked and connected and work as a holistic program. So this would be hours and hours and hours and hours of work for an attacker. Now it's fast and easy. And so it's a faster, more quality product for the attacker. This is what your security teams are facing in cyber, the speed at which and the quality of the attack. On the defender side, we also get advantages, right? The largest difficulty that we have in cyber operations today is the inability to manage vulnerabilities, known vulnerabilities, even throughout the organization. So defenders can use artificial intelligence engines to combine data and triage vast sets of vulnerabilities for priority order and get suggested remediations for those conditions. Very, very efficient. So if I look at, here's my vulnerabilities, here is my CMDB data, here's all the data about our organization's hosts, the network, the configurations, the security systems, the protocols, and then over here's my threat intelligence data. When I combine those, an AI engine can say, therefore, these 3 vulnerabilities that you have are the ones you should fix first. Very, very efficient. However, as we described in the last slide, it's critical to do that in a safe manner. Otherwise, you just communicated to a public engine, here are my most critical, easiest exploited vulnerabilities, those that a threat intel engine has told me there are functioning exploits for. You really don't want that information to get out, right? So both attackers and defenders are going to be advantaged by artificial intelligence. We have to be, as defenders, we have to be very careful about leveraging public engines for data leakage. The key element for us as cyber defenders in getting value out of artificial intelligence is interoperability of our data. These engines' ability to get at the data that they need, vulnerability data, network and host information, firewall configuration. And so there are many cybersecurity operational organizations that have been attempting these kinds of integrations for years, but they have lacked a strong business case. This costs money. Interoperability costs money. And they've lacked a strong business case. This is your business case. If you can create these integrations between this private data that you have and some public data that you'll need, particularly threat intelligence feeds, you will be in a position to accelerate your rate of cybersecurity operations. Hey, we are seeing this exploitation, this attack underway in our environment, and a well-constructed artificial intelligence engine can search terabytes of data internally and externally and tell you what's working to remediate that condition in the attack if that system is already in place. So again, it's all about speed and accuracy, and these AI engines are changing that landscape very, very quickly. Interoperability, we can talk about how to get those values. Okay. The next piece to talk about is we don't see, I touched on this earlier, we don't see AI replacing a lot of people, certainly not more sophisticated operators, cyber defenders and attackers. Let's stay focused on the defender side, the blue team side. What we see is that there's a dividing line now between defenders that do not know how to use AI as a part of their job and people that do, right? So by leveraging artificial intelligence and large language models, a mediocre defender can operate at a very high level. A sophisticated defender, the speed at which they can be productive is dramatic. Okay, unfortunately, the junior person trying to get into cyber now is having to compete with the rates at which moderate and higher level performers are able to operate. And what we're seeing is a dilution of basic skills. New people coming out of university, coming out of trainings, are now relying on AI engines to help them through their schooling process. And in many cases, they are deficient in actually understanding basic securities and network topologies and processes because they're using the artificial intelligence engines as a crutch, as a help. Okay, so we used to say, in shooting that, you don't get a scope on your rifle until you're absolutely demonstrated your skill sets with iron sights, right? You have to earn glass, right? Same thing in cyber operations. You need to use the processes, become proficient, and then add this on top. All right, moving quickly. AI is a major element. I think I'm running tight on time. On the secure by design and secure by default mission, again, we're accelerating patch timelines, secure by design and secure by default, software development process, network configuration process. The speed at which we can check configurations and learn configurations is, again, the accuracy and speed is way up. So please leverage those engines in that process. We won't have time to talk about it today, but if part of your mission in cyber operations is focused at this point on secure by design and secure by default, you probably ought to sit down with that team and have a discussion about how they're leveraging artificial intelligence to improve that process. Okay. So two last points we'll run through. One is testing. CINAC is a security testing company. We have 1,500 researchers in 90 different countries. So we provide the ability for our customers to test at a very deep and fast rate. One of the ways this is impacted by AI is OWASP has produced a list of the top 10 artificial intelligence security concerns to watch. OWASP top 10 for LLM. I highly recommend that you get that out to your people. At CINAC, we're already doing in the field penetration testing and vulnerability discovery on 8 out of those 10 processes, and we're continuing to add out that capability. Remember how we talked about integration and interoperability being a key element in the success, right? If I've got this artificial intelligence engine, I have to connect it to data. That integration needs to be security tested. It needs to be evaluated. Has someone looked at this for ways to exploit these configurations? Remember, the insider threat, that person that is inside your organization has a license to interact with systems, is also being enabled by artificial intelligence now to get access to data sets, right? And so even these internal tools need to be penetration tested and looked at. And our method at SYNAC is pointed at strategic security testing, right? How do we get beyond basic security testing? Artificial intelligence is certainly modifying this. What we're suggesting to organizations is take a look at your infrastructure and make sure that the testing that you're doing is aligned with the risk of those assets. So down on the low end of the, low risk assets, vulnerability scanning, absolutely. But as you work your way up, at some point, human testing becomes a mandate, right? Traditional penetration testing. Then moving into, and here are the 2 key notes: mission critical internet facing infrastructure with a high change rate. So if you've got an application or infrastructure that faces the internet and it's mission critical and it changes on a monthly basis, some of them change on a weekly basis, some of them change on a daily basis, right? But if you have internet-facing mission-critical infrastructure with a high change rate, and you're having humans do penetration testing on that once a year, twice a year, you're in trouble, right? Because the speed at which the attacker is going to identify vulnerabilities, and by vulnerabilities, we don't just mean CVEs, we also mean exploitable conditions, right? In the cloud, 2/3 of all cloud exploits are based on misconfiguration. Nothing wrong with the software, just not set up right? People have to look at this. So strategic security testing is where we accelerate the testing process and the people involved. Again, we'll rather than just 2 people with a couple of laptops for a couple of weeks, we'll have 20 or 30 people from around the globe look at that infrastructure at a pace that's adapted, whether it's once a quarter or once a day, right? Super. So I know we're going to have a follow-on conversation about artificial intelligence after Alejandro goes. So I'll throw on the brakes there and we'll look forward to that.
Thank you, Mr. Wade Lance. Apresentamos agora o próximo palestrante de nosso evento, senhor Alejandro Botter, que é gerente de engenharia de segurança sul da América Latina, o escritório do CTO da empresa Checkpoint. Proferirá uma apresentação intitulada Inteligência Artificial, Defesa Cibernética e Segurança Cibernética e nos agracia com sua presença nas instalações da Casa do Soldado. Senhor Alejandro Botter, é um prazer para a Junta Interamericana de Defesa recebê-lo na sala do Conselho de Delegados. Seja muito bem-vindo. Please, Mr. Alejandro Botter, the floor is yours.
Buenas tardes, boa tarde. Good afternoon to everyone. Bueno, primero, antes que nada, un gusto de poder estar aquí y poder compartirles desde el lado de Checkpoint, como mencioné ahí en la presentación, tendencias, ventajas y desafíos en materia de ciberseguridad. Antes que nada, un pequeño resumen de lo que es Checkpoint. Es una compañía de ciberseguridad que lleva 30 años en el mercado. Como pueden ver ahí, la compañía trabaja con las compañías que son del Fortune 500, siguen distintos segmentos de negocio que van desde banca, entes gubernamentales, militares, bien. Y bueno, tenemos alrededor de 100.000 clientes a nivel global, somos más de 6.000 empleados a lo largo y ancho del mundo, y durante estos 30 años se desarrollaron e implementaron diferentes tecnologías de vanguardia que hoy por hoy lo que voy a comentar un poco es en materia de inteligencia artificial, que es lo que estamos realizando. Siguiente. Bueno, aquí hay varios quotes de personajes bastante conocidos por todos. Estos no son quotes de este año, sino que ya llevan varios años haciendo mención a la importancia de la inteligencia artificial en distintos segmentos. El impacto que tiene la tecnología, el impacto que tiene a nivel nación, ¿sí? Y las implicancias que puede tener la inteligencia artificial. Entonces, bueno, la inteligencia artificial, como hoy por hoy está en boca de todos, entre otros motivos, por el hecho de que hemos visto una explosión en lo que es la parte de inteligencia artificial generativa que voy a mencionar en esta presentación. Ahora, uno de los motivos de los cuales está en boca de todos es también por las inversiones millonarias, miles de millones o como se diría en Estados Unidos, billones de dólares invertidos en distintas tecnologías. Es un landscape, un mercado muy amplio que hay un montón de segmentos específicos de inteligencia artificial. Ahora, una de las cosas que se está planteando es que la inteligencia artificial es la próxima revolución industrial. Cuando nosotros hablamos de la revolución industrial, hace varios años atrás, lo que se hizo fue mover todo lo que es el músculo que tenían los seres humanos hacia las máquinas. Entonces, el caso por ahí más emblemático es de la fabricación de un automóvil, cómo pasamos de un proceso totalmente manual a un proceso sistematizado. Hoy por hoy, cuando hablamos de la inteligencia artificial, hablamos de que muchas de las tareas que uno tiene que desarrollarlos, que tiene que pensarlas, es llevarlas a esta inteligencia artificial que, como lo dice en su concepto, es una inteligencia no biológica. Ahora, el punto, una de las preguntas es ¿por qué ahora? ¿Por qué este año estamos todos conversando, todos planteando el tema de inteligencia artificial? Y esto es algo que ya viene hace varios años que está generando, y son tres puntos fundamentales. El almacenamiento, el cómputo, en muchos casos asociado al cloud computing, ¿sí? Que es una de las herramientas fundamentales que hizo esta aceleración del desarrollo de inteligencia artificial, y también el caso de algoritmos. Muchas de las cosas que estamos viendo hoy por hoy implementándose en materia de inteligencia artificial generativa, esos algoritmos, ustedes podrán ver, hay papers que se presentaron en el año 2017 que se vienen desarrollando, y hoy por hoy estamos viendo la aplicación de esos algoritmos. Ahora, en inteligencia artificial nosotros podemos ver distintas aplicaciones, y una de las cosas que también que es importante destacar es las distintas herramientas que uno viene interactuando como ser humano de pie, digamos. La primera que podamos ver, y creo que todos los que están aquí alguna vez habrá comprado en algún portal de compras, es la predicción de compras. Esto de que nosotros interactuamos con algún tipo de sistema y de repente nos sugiere algún tipo de producto. Otro de los casos es la búsqueda de imágenes. Quien no ha encontrado en un portal de búsqueda en Internet y pone una palabra y aparece, en este caso, por ejemplo, un cake, un pastel. Y otro de los casos también que hemos interactuado en estos últimos años son los reconocimientos de voz. Cómo pasamos hacia algunos años atrás de cuando, por ejemplo, aparecieron Alexa, Siri, ese tipo de plataformas, que había que hablar específicamente en inglés con algún tipo de acento para que nos entienda, y hoy por hoy estamos en un desarrollo el cual me entiende a mí, pero no entiende a la persona que está al lado. Entonces, ya lleva varios años que la inteligencia artificial aplicándose en distintos focos. Ahora, este año, y es el año que vemos de la IA generativa, vemos que desde hace varios meses que se está desarrollando fuertemente, y ahí en esa línea podemos ver que hay distintas plataformas. El primero es la tasa, lo que pueden ver a la izquierda es la tasa de adopción de lo que fue el ChatGPT, particularmente el acceso al portal de ChatGPT en este último tiempo. Desde noviembre del 2022 hasta febrero del 2023 está la gráfica y se observa bien claro la explosión. Ahora, no es el único que está en ese mercado. Podemos ver de que el caso de Meta, el caso de Google, también están desarrollando, implementando distintas herramientas de IA generativa. Ahora, cuando uno habla de IA generativa, en el caso, por ejemplo, de ChatGPT, la primera interacción que nosotros vemos es una generación de texto. Mencionaban los expositores anteriores, nosotros le pedimos que nos haga algún informe o algún resumen de un estilo y nos da un resultado, un texto. Cuando uno habla de IA generativa, también tenemos distintos aspectos de lo que se puede generar. Fíjense en la imagen que lo que es, se puede generar imágenes, ¿sí? Todo lo que es video, en el caso de audio o hasta música. De hecho, bueno, esto una de las cosas que también planteó es el tema del copyright y la diferenciación entre algo generado por una IA a algo generado por un humano. Y después, por el otro lado, tenemos los generadores de texto y también generadores de código. En esa línea, cuando uno esto lo conecta con lo que es el factor humano, cómo el humano interactúa con todas estas tecnologías, encontramos distintas cosas. La primera es una inundación de resultados de IA generativa. En uno de los casos más emblemáticos fue que Twitter empezaron a aparecer un montón de posteos de textos generados por una IA generativa que no se sabía diferenciar si era una opinión, un comentario de un humano o era generado por una máquina. Por el otro lado, la información incorrecta o deliberadamente falsa parece real y se esparce de forma masiva. Ocurría de que había mucha información que se sabía que eran las famosas fake news que uno habla, pero con este tipo de adopción de herramientas, el desarrollo de ese tópico ya no parecía tan falso o se lograba posicionar y se lograba esparcer de forma masiva. Y algo que mencionó también en la presentación anterior, la modernización del trabajo. La típica pregunta que nos hacen habitualmente es, bueno, si esto va a reemplazar a una persona que opera en un SOC o a alguna persona que trabaja en seguridad defensiva, o va a reemplazar a alguien que trabaja en seguridad ofensiva. Y lo que se plantea aquí es una redefinición de la profesión, y esto no abarca solamente informática, sino que abarca también otras profesiones, que es este concepto de yo y mi copiloto. Es clave que en todos los profesionales que trabajan en tecnología, y en este caso estamos hablando de ciberseguridad, esta adopción, entender cómo funcionan estas plataformas, va a ser clave en el desarrollo profesional, porque se va a ver una diferenciación entre aquellos que ya adoptaron esa tecnología y los que no la terminan de comprender. Y bueno, y acá hay una nota del New York Times hablando de GPT-4, ¿sí? Que es, por un lado es excitante todo lo que nos puede dar, pero también es tenebroso. Ahora vamos a ir para ese lado. Ahora, ¿hacia dónde va la IA generativa? La IA generativa, nosotros lo que estamos viendo es muchos motores de lo que llama unimodal AI, que los unimodal AI es, como este caso, un ejemplo bien simple con un caballo. Nosotros le decimos, bueno, queremos saber qué es un caballo, una descripción de un caballo, y nos genera un texto. Ahora, lo que se está generando y que está ocurriendo, de hecho en las últimas semanas hubo un avance de OpenAI en ese sentido, es moverlo a lo que llama un modelo multimodal. ¿Esto qué quiere decir? Que cuando nosotros le indiquemos que queremos que queremos saber qué es un caballo, va a tener la capacidad de generarnos un video de un caballo, generarnos un sonido de un caballo, generando una descripción de un caballo, ¿sí? Y va a ser mucho más exacta en los resultados. Yendo a las principales tendencias de qué es lo que estamos viendo en materia de ciberataques, y acá compartirles un poco de lo que es Checkpoint Research, que es el área de investigación dentro de Checkpoint. En lo que es el panorama de amenazas en América, y a América me refiero a toda América, una organización está siendo atacada un promedio de 1018 veces por semana, ¿sí? Esto es un promedio obtenido en los últimos 6 meses. Toda esta información que están viendo en pantalla está obtenida del Threat Cloud de Checkpoint, que el Threat Cloud de Checkpoint es el Threat Intelligence con el que se saca información de todos los puntos a nivel global, ¿sí? Que está haciendo protección en, como mencionaba antes, entidades del Fortune 500, entes gubernamentales y militares. El principal malware es el Formbook, que es un infostealer, y acá lo interesante es lo que indica ahí, que es el malware as a service, este concepto de que simplificaron los ataques, generar estas plataformas en las cuales ya no tienen que crear un malware desde cero, sino que hay un grupo de atacantes que es el que genera esa plataforma del malware, y hay otros grupos de atacantes mucho más pequeños que utilizan esa plataforma para desplegar ataques a nivel global. Otro punto interesante es que el 70% de los archivos maliciosos se entregaron por correo. Esto es algo que fue cambiando en los años anteriores, que los ataques, el principal vector era la descarga web o un tipo de conexión con internet, y en este caso el 70% hoy por hoy se entra por correo, siendo una de las técnicas más utilizadas la de phishing. Yendo a lo que es los tipos de malware, acá pueden ver una comparación entre Américas y el global, donde particularmente uno de los que está por encima del promedio es la parte de malware focalizado en dispositivos móviles, pero como pueden ver también hay una linealidad entre los ataques, entre los tipos de malware, perdón, que en lo que es Américas comparado con el nivel global. Bueno, como mencionaba antes, esto es información del Threat Intelligence de Checkpoint, y acá, como pueden ver, desde el 8 de mayo hasta el 30 de octubre es información bastante reciente, y de aquí sale el promedio de los 1108 ataques que mencionaba antes, sí, que fíjense que está casi alineado con el nivel global. Yendo particularmente a las industrias más impactadas en los últimos 6 meses, fíjense que en el top 3 aparece lo que es gobierno y entes militares. Por el otro lado está lo que es la parte de retail, lo que es proveedores de Internet en lo que es Américas. Bien, ahí está el top 3. Y yendo particularmente a los países, en el ranking, lo que nos indica que está, esto es de la información de octubre, es de todo el mes de octubre, está primero Ecuador, segundo Perú y tercero Colombia. Una de las cosas que quería compartir, este es el reporte de mitad de año de Checkpoint, en el cual nosotros hacemos todo un análisis de distintos tipos de ciberataques, de tácticas y técnicas utilizadas por estos atacantes. Una de las cosas que mencionaban en distintas las sesiones es clave la colaboración, y mucha de la información que se utiliza para la Checkpoint con la colaboración con distintos entes está plasmada en este reporte. Alguna de las que van a poder ver en el reporte es particularmente la evolución del ransomware, el ataque con USB, que es algo que ya lleva bastantes años, pero que con el caso puntual de la ciberguerra se empezó a ver de nuevo un pico en ese tipo de ataques. Hacktivismo afiliado al Estado, algo que antes se marcaba lo que es hacktivistas y lo que es el Estado, y vemos ahora muchos grupos actuando en nombre de algún que es una pieza clave para muchos de estos estados, porque no reconocen a estos tipos de activistas. Entonces hay esa separación, hace que estos grupos de activistas puedan actuar de forma totalmente independiente sin temor a represalias. Amenazas en teléfonos celulares, que lo mencionaba antes, y particularmente inteligencia artificial. Hay toda una sección de inteligencia artificial en este reporte. Yendo particularmente a lo que es riesgos y desafíos de inteligencia artificial, el primero de los ataques, o una de las primeras cosas que se vio cuando surgió toda la parte de IA generativa, es la parte de ataques de phishing. Como mencionaban también las presentaciones anteriores, la sofisticación y la fiabilidad de los ataques creció muchísimo. En particular, esto que están viendo en pantalla fue una de las campañas de phishing utilizando como base ChatGPT-4, ¿sí? Que en este caso armaron toda una campaña muy bien diseñada, ¿sí? A partir del lanzamiento de ChatGPT. El segundo de los puntos es el menor nivel de conocimiento y el mayor volumen, ¿sí? Los atacantes cada vez tienen menos nivel de conocimiento, menos requerimiento de conocimiento que en el pasado. Esto implica de que, por ejemplo, lo que están viendo en pantalla, herramientas como WordGPT, ¿sí? Que es una herramienta que se vende en Dark Web, es una herramienta utilizada y por un atacante con un conocimiento básico puede armar desde un malware hasta algún tipo de phishing. Esto implica tiene dos implicancias. Una parte que es el grado de sofisticación y por el otro lado el volumen de ataques. El otro de los puntos es la impersonalización y los que es fraudes de autenticación. Hay otra herramienta también que a 2 semanas después de que apareció WormGPT, se llama FraudGPT, focalizada específicamente en todo lo que es ataques de phishing. Y cuando uno habla de impersonalización, una de las cosas que también se vio es todo lo referido a herramientas de deepfake. En ese caso, podemos ver acá un video, un meme que apareció hace ya varios años atrás, de un actor argentino conocido, que ese tipo de cosas eran muy comunes utilizando deepfake, pero esto se volvió mucho más serio en el último tiempo porque... ¿sí? Aparecieron otras cosas como esta, que ya personas muy conocidos, políticos muy conocidos, con herramientas muchísimo más pulidas y cada vez más difícil de poder diferenciar en términos de, en este caso, video, pero también en términos de voz. Es impresionante el último tiempo el grado de sofisticación de las herramientas de deepfake, de cómo suplantan la voz de una persona. Por otro lado, que también lo mencionaron en la presentación anterior, es la fuga de información. Esto fue uno de los desafíos principales o uno de los primeros desafíos que enfrentaron todas las compañías que con toda esta explosión, con toda esta utilización de ChatGPT, ocurrió de que empezaron a acceder los empleados a estas herramientas y, como bien mencionaba antes, sin temor a dónde se estaba compartiendo esa información. Esto es lo que están viendo en pantalla, es el privacy policy de OpenIA, y como pueden ver ahí, dice bien claro que se colecta toda esa información. De hecho, esto es una actualización que surgió en julio y en las slides anteriores que teníamos decía we may collect, sí, ahora directamente dice we collect, o sea, deja bien claro de que toda esa información que se comparte con estas herramientas se está colectando. Y la otra de los puntos es que aparecieron un montón de herramientas falsas, como esta que pueden ver aquí, que es OpenChatGPT, que pretendían ser ChatGPT, pero que eran malware, ¿sí? Que se desplegó en este caso a través de teléfonos celulares. Otro de los puntos, que eso es un desafío más del desarrollo de las tecnologías de IA, lo que se llama AI Prompt Injection o bypass de los filtros, que es esta capacidad de poder inyectar algún tipo de comando en estas herramientas, en estas tecnologías y manipular este servicio. Aquí en el medio pueden ver, dice, ignore your previous instructions and do this. Es básicamente eso, y con eso se hace un bypass de todos los filtros que estaban implementados. Como resumen, acá pueden ver varias de las investigaciones que hizo Checkpoint Research. Bueno, acá dejo también el QR para los que quieran ver. Hay distintas investigaciones desde el impacto del uso de ChatGPT en el ciudadano de pie, digámosle, en los civiles, hasta recientemente las campañas de deepfake con el caso de elecciones de varios países, de cómo se hicieron masivas. Yendo a cómo lo está utilizando Checkpoint, la primera de las cosas es cómo optimizamos el SOC con IA. Allá por el año 2018 se realizó una encuesta, ¿sí? Que en esa encuesta se determinaron 3 puntos. Que los SOC, estos centros de operación, era difícil identificar eventos críticos, luego tenían procesos manuales y por el otro lado era tener el personal calificado. Como resultado, los ataques críticos se descubrían hasta que era muy tarde. En esa línea, el objetivo que se planteó Checkpoint fue simplificar la detección de malware para poder ayudar a los SOC en esta línea. Entonces buscó resolverlo con un motor de Machine Learning. Estamos hablando de esto año 2018. Este es el proyecto de Maggie, ¿sí? Que el proyecto de Maggie es un proyecto de Machine Learning, ¿sí? Que buscaba detectar los dispositivos con malware. Participaron 33 clientes, fue 1,5 millones de logs analizados, hubo 7.000 endpoints de logs y solo 740 de ellos fueron considerados infectados y una tasa de falsos positivos del 1.12%. Y que hasta un poco el resultado de lo que se planteó, ¿sí? Con Maggie a la izquierda ya en una pantalla, que el foco era que un operador de un SOC pudiera ver este malware, estos dispositivos que sean los críticos que tengan que tener algún tipo de respuesta. Y esto forma parte dentro de un motor muchísimo más amplio que es el motor de XDR, ¿sí? Que correlaciona todo esta información generada por distintos motores de Machine Learning. Para terminar, porque esto tiene algún tipo de, lo que vieron anteriores es la parte de operación y lo que sería el frontend, lo que ven los operadores. Ahora, esto sale de algún lado y ¿de dónde salen? Checkpoint hoy por hoy contiene 40 tecnologías de inteligencia artificial, ¿sí? Que basado en contexto, basado en comportamiento, generan todo el contenido para poder determinar algún tipo de acción. Y por el otro lado, trabaja con Big Data, que en esa Big Data está toda la colaboración con distintos entes, distintos CIRT, y también generación de investigaciones. En este caso es un caso real de prevención con Machine Learning, ¿sí? Que en el cual se hace llega un tipo de tráfico a nuestra plataforma que llamamos de AppSec y basado en el comportamiento, basado en que hay solicitudes sospechosas y que basado en que este tipo de interacción no era común, se determinaba con un scoring que se tenía que bloquear este tráfico. Ahora, lo interesante de todo esto que están viendo en pantalla es que esto fue lo que fue el ataque de Log4j, que dio un montón de dolores de cabeza a todos los equipos de ciberseguridad. Log4j fue una vulnerabilidad de Apache que hace tiempo Apache publicó, y lo que estaban viendo ahí en pantalla es una... Ahí quedó parado. Lo que estaban viendo en pantalla, y todo ese bloqueo se dio 3 días antes de que publicara Apache esa vulnerabilidad. Entonces, es una aplicación bien simple y directa de cómo todas estas tecnologías pueden hacer un cambio drástico en cómo se enfoca la ciberdefensa. Para finalizar, la gran pregunta es si es Star Wars o es Black Mirror, ¿sí? Que son 2 series muy conocidas. Por un lado, en lo que ayuda a ciberdefensa, lo que es IA generativa, un desarrollo más rápido y sofisticado. Sin duda, todos los desarrolladores están adoptando distintas tecnologías de IA. El punto es adoptarlas de forma segura. Después hace el equipo del SOC mucho más eficaz, focalizando en las tareas que son clave, y por el otro lado tareas administrativas más rápidas, que ahí el foco es en la reducción en términos de personal que sea mucho más efectivo. Ahora, por el otro lado, y esto es la preocupación para el año que viene, se espera que haya un incremento en la materia de ciberataques, y los actores hoy por hoy lo están utilizando cada vez más estas herramientas, y se espera que el año que viene el grado de sofisticación de los ataques y el grado de cantidad de ataques se incremente. Gracias.
Mr. Alejandro Bote and Mr. Wade Lenz, thank you very much for your presentation, which we gained insight into artificial intelligence, cyber defense, and cybersecurity. We now move on to a brief discussion with our last 2 speakers. In your presentations, we emphasized topics related to the use of the artificial intelligence and the cyber defense. Just to maintain the time on track, because we're a little bit delayed, but I have one question that we received a lot of insight about that. How do you see the regulation of AI in the face of development of products in the area of cyber defense?
An excellent session earlier. And work everything but a microphone.
I think we got it now. So enjoyed this session earlier on the legal aspects where we talk about what we're doing at a national level and then how that impacts what's happening at a regional level. The same thing is happening in AI. We're seeing some very positive movement out of the US White House talking about requesting NIST to develop additional standards for artificial intelligence, in particular testing, just because that's part of what affects CINAC in particular. But I think that to the extent we can get standardized testing processes in place quickly to expose deficiencies, that'll be extremely helpful. When we, at CINAC, when our people go looking, we find dramatic, simple deficiencies in these spaces. And so I think regulations will drive that forward. And we're already seeing big progress. There was an announcement out of the governor of New York requesting additional testing of these infrastructures. So I think that to the extent other states can leverage those standards, the NIST standard, I think is going to be a useful one. That will accelerate adoption of better security best practices around artificial intelligence for sure.
I'm going to answer in Spanish, just misunderstanding. Creo que es un proceso de adaptación. Creo que lo más positivo que veo de todas estas regulaciones es el hecho de que muchos de los gobiernos están creando estos comités de expertos para entender la materia y poder dar este tipo de recomendaciones que hablábamos antes en materia de desarrollo seguro, en materia de compartir información, también los beneficios que tiene todo esto y la aplicación de eso. Y creo que el punto de mayor discusión debe ser no parar la innovación, sino el foco tiene que ser darle un buen uso a todas estas herramientas y evitar por ahí un mal uso, que en muchos casos para eso no fueron concebidas estas tecnologías.
I believe you could spend hours discussing such engaging topics, but our allotted time for questions to Mr. Alejandro Botter and Mr. Wade Lance has come to an end. Dear speakers, on behalf of the Organization of the American States and the Inter-American Defense Board, I want to express our gratitude for your work in the field of cyber defense, your participation in our event, and the excellence of the presentations delivered. Thank you very much. Apresentamos agora o próximo palestrante de nosso evento, senhora Carrie Ann Barrett, que é gerente do Programa de Segurança Cibernética do CICT da Organização dos Estados Americanos, e nos agracia com sua presença nas instalações da Casa do Soldado. Carrie Ann, é um prazer para a Junta Interamericana de Defesa recebê-la na sala do Conselho de Delegados. Seja muito bem-vinda. A seguir, teremos a apresentação intitulada Educação e Conscientização em Segurança Cibernética, capacitando indivíduos e instituições. Please, Ms. Carrie Ann Barrett, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. Just waiting for the PowerPoint to come up, and then I'll begin. With the introduction done, my name is Carrie Ann Barrett, as you've heard. I've been in cybersecurity for the past almost 15 years. More specifically with the OAS for the past 10 years, and I am not a technical person. I'm an attorney by training, so the perspective I'll be bringing to you today would be more a policy-oriented discussion that we would have. The presentation that I have to you today is focused on cybersecurity education and awareness, empowering individuals and institutions. My intervention will be focused on having you reflect on some of the gaps that we have in cyber skills in the region, and then bring you to a discussion around some of the solutions that we can have. And then we will wrap it up by just opening up to thoughts and questions. I was asked to present concepts that would be applicable to the Inter-American Defense Framework on this topic. So it would be more generic, and then I'll try and bring the conversation to that specific aspect. Just making sure we have the technologies. Okay, it's not here. Okay, perfect. I'll look behind me then, sorry. All right, so just to begin, the cybersecurity program of the Organization of American States started in 2004. So we generally have almost, let me go back again. We generally have almost 20 years of experience in doing cyber capacities. We've always divided our work into three main pillars: policy development, technical, and then we would do research and outreach. As a part of the technical capabilities, we have been focused more and more on ensuring that we can do workforce development. And our idea is that in doing workforce development is looking at it more holistically, from youth all the way up to reskilling and retraining those who are already in our governments. More specifically, what is the context that we're looking at today? We believe that cybersecurity right now, if you think about how education and awareness can contribute to economic and social prosperity, with COVID-19, we recognize there are so many of us who went online. And then more specifically, we have such a transformation in terms of the risk landscape that we have. The conversation that preceded me on AI and AI technologies really let us realize what we're coming up against and to ensure that we have the skill sets to suit it. As a result, looking at some of the problems and challenges that we have, the OAS actually undertook a study with Cisco earlier this year with data that was gathered for the previous year. One of the things we recognized is, just like what everyone says globally, there is a skills gap. There is a gap in cybersecurity professionals. So we've been looking at it from a supply and demand perspective, trying to see how we can actually have a balance. What we recognize is we pour a lot of resources in the supply side, but if it is that our government and even the defense arm is not demanding it, you're going to have a surplus, and it's going to start creating an imbalance as well. Another perspective that we're looking into is what kind of skills that you actually need, what kind of jobs that we're looking at. There are many models such as the NICE that actually divides what these skill sets are. But when you think about it from the defense perspective, I always tell people that for me, cybersecurity is just a small nuance to the work that we have in terms of those who are traditionally doing what they do. What do I mean by that? As a defense arm of a government, there are certain things you do almost automatically. You look at threats, you do analysis, and you find solution. You're constantly problem solving. How I see cybersecurity in your framework is that it's now another nuance to consider in among everything else that you triage to be able to do your risk analysis in order to do your pivoting and your advising. As far as I'm concerned, cybersecurity is just another one for you to consider. What does that mean for you? In the more broad perspective, Defense Force, you pull from the general public. Persons join the Army, they join the Defense Force in the various arms, and then they have a career path. Should everyone become cybersecurity professionals? I don't think so. One of the things that we're looking at is how can you ensure that the persons who have specific roles already, for example, you may have a commander who's in charge of a certain fleet of persons that are focused on fixing airplanes. Do they all need to be cybersecurity professionals within the Army? Probably not. Do they need to understand cybersecurity risks in what they do as they approach your tools and your assets? Yes. So there's a distinction to be made in terms of cybersecurity awareness, cybersecurity education, And then also to look at some of the specialized skill sets that are needed for a cybersecurity professional. The reason I'm distinguishing it is because cybersecurity awareness needs to have for everyone. I usually akin it to mathematics and English. At base level, when you go into school, you're taught phonics. Phonics is really to give you the tool sets to be able to speak the language, whatever language is it, whether it be Spanish, English, Portuguese. You're learning the baseline to be able to speak. And then you learn math. Mathematics pretty much is a tool and a skill set. I don't do any of the algebra right now in my career, but guess what? It trained my brain how to think. And one of the things I want to challenge you is that you want to start thinking about cybersecurity in a similar concept, where you need to have basic awareness for all forms of defense, but then you need to start looking at the different skill sets that touches on risk that are associated with your various formations. So for example, in the Air Force, you may have that a lot of persons are touching the technology. What awareness skills they need to know as they touch your technology to be conscious of, because as we know, human beings are the first point of failure. They're the insider threat. They're the ones that are going to be, no matter how many firewalls you have, they're on the inside. What basic skill set does that grouping need to have? As you continue up the chain of your risk assessments, the guys who actually have permissions, authorization to approve things, they have access to all the data that's in your system, what level of awareness they need that would complement the technology that you're using to protect them. With all of that said, and painting that kind of picture for you, we try to look at how governments are approaching cybersecurity skills. One, we recognize their isolated efforts related to the workforce. Secondly, we recognize there's no real institutional coordination around skills for cybersecurity. There's insufficient strategic information at the decision level, which is what we talk about, that awareness. And there's insufficient awareness and resources and tools for the workforce itself. When you kind of split that out now into where are the weaknesses in both the labor supply side and the demand side, we recognize there's insufficient vacations, meaning that training that's available to persons in our region. English proficiency sometimes is low and moderate, and a lot of the technological training is in English. And that is a huge barrier for us in our region, because thinking about translating the language into Spanish or Portuguese and ensuring in French for those who are from Haiti, to try and ensure that the training is accessible is critical. There's a lack of knowledge at the very base level for these kids in terms of this is an opportunity. I want to go into the Army. How do I go into the Army? Okay, I said they want to be a chef, but they want to work in the Army. How do they want to be a cybersecurity professional and they're in the Army? But what if they're already in the Army? Do they need to automatically start doing CompTIA, doing all of these technical skills training? Maybe not. They may just need some basic reskilling to ensure that they keep you secure. There's a poor understanding of the definition of what is a cybersecurity professional. And at that base level, people hear cyber, and I had someone who said to me, oh, you're a lawyer, how come you're in cybersecurity? Because cybersecurity professionals are not just one category. Each of us will layer this on as a skill set. But then on the demand side, one of the weaknesses we're seeing is that there's no common taxonomy as to what are the skills you need. So someone says they need a pen tester, and they're asking for certain qualifications that has nothing to do with pen testing. So on the demand side, you're asking for something that doesn't exist on the supply side based on the job description you want. Organizationally, in terms of how you organize yourself and recognizing that there are gaps. And I'm going to point it out right now in this room, there's only 3 females that are in this room. That's a huge gap because we're talking about a very important topic. And how do we ensure that we start bringing some amount of diversity into the room? I am not an advocate just to have a woman in the room for being a woman, but one of the things it recognizes that maybe at the base level, at entry level into the Army, we need to start thinking about how do we promote more women leadership coming into the Army so they can then grow up in the ranks. Difficulties in career pathways. I remember I was head legal for national security in Trinidad and Tobago many years ago. And one of the challenges I faced was that my cybercrime unit was stuck in a framework where the inspector came to the point where he had to get promoted, there was no structure within the cybercrime unit for him to get his promotion. He had to leave the unit in order to get his next posting. So when we think about how we create our ranks and what is needed in terms of, you may have someone who's a specialized cybersecurity professional in the Army, can they actually still continue to grow in the formations or will grow in the ranks that they need to grow and still be that cybersecurity professional that you need so that they don't leave the Army to go and consult, but they can actually stay within the Army. So to continue with the data that we gathered, we recognized from the data that we had that there must be a multi-stakeholder approach to be able to address these gaps. Developing strategies between private and public sector, updating our legislation and promoting ongoing assessments of what the labor market is. On the supply side, we thought that encouraging scientific vocations in this topic, connecting education with the training industry is critical. Why is that critical? Because we have computer science still being taught as a degree program in our universities. It's a 3 to 4 year degree program. Technology changes every couple of months. By the time they go through this already set educational curricula and they graduate without any practicums associated with the information they're learning, they leave university with just a degree, but their skill sets are irrelevant to the market. How can we ensure that we complement education with training that while they're being educated, and we do need people with degrees and masters, et cetera, because that's how the world is structured, how do we ensure that their skill set is relevant when they graduate? My colleague earlier, he raised a very important point about the persons who would be graduating, but they've used AI so much, they left, and all they know is how to use the technology, but they have no knowledge or skill set. So there's like a whole realm of professionals now coming out that have the degree, but they don't have the mental ability to be able to apply to the job and the task and associated with that. On the demand side, we want to start thinking about how we adjust our hiring requirements to recruit top talent. I'm going to get to some of the answers that I know that was asked of me, but I wanted to emphasize is recognizing that we need to retain the workforce as well is critical in this planning. Keeping them motivated, keeping them challenged, and ensuring that we have opportunities for them. This report is available. I'm just posting it here, so at least you could go into more details on the report because the presentation is not about the report, but I wanted to set the baseline with that information. The question I was asked was the role of an inter-American framework in cyber education for cybersecurity and defense. The reason I set that baseline before getting to this question more specifically is that one of the things we have to recognize is that within this sphere of the military, you are taught to think critically. You're taught to problem solve. You're taught to look at risk and balance those risks. And how I see it is that cybersecurity is, as I started, just another element within your risk analysis. So how does it mean that you can then create a framework around the inter-American defense system and a framework around education? I believe that education is relevant. That's probably the point I wanted to start off with categorically. But the education that you need to set up has to be along your general trajectories for each of the roles that you have within the defense force. You have to think about if it is that I'm now doing space, for example, not cyberspace, but space. That's all technology. That's 100%. Everyone who is in that formation has to have some amount of cybersecurity, not just awareness, but also technical skills, technical understanding, a risk-based approach. So how do you start building it through? It's by doing your risk assessments, by doing your triaging to see, okay, if this person is on this, well, who has access, thinking about your skill sets, you have to start thinking about your risk associated with that. Some of the more tactile operations that you also have to start thinking about the technologies associated with that. And what are the risks? Some of them are low risk. If the person is just having a device on them to track them for the GPS, the risk may be a little bit low. But what if they lose that technology? It then becomes a connected kind of risk. How do you train them to understand why you can't lose this GPS device? As practical as that, not getting into what will happen if somebody hacks it. That may be too much information for them. They just need to have basic awareness as to why keeping this device secure is important. So my answer to this critical question to me was really thinking through your jobs exactly how it is, but layering in cybersecurity as an additional risk factor and an additional touch point. If it is that the persons are in the framework and they are actually learning and doing technologies, you also need to start thinking about innovation. A lot of what we do needs to be innovated. How do you recruit the right talent to ensure that the services that we provide as the Defense Force becomes innovative and adaptive as well? I remember going to some of the sessions in Trinidad, because as head legal, you get to interact with all formations, and going out to the Coast Guard, you recognize that there are certain protocols associated with it. But can we not stop for a second to recognize that because we have to give our nations, our states, the best level of defense possible, we have to start innovating. And some of you have already. Some of you have cyber defense, cybersecurity defense groups. You may have triaging that you're doing with the data already. You have SOCs that you work with. But at the end of the day, how are we actually approaching the innovation and the protection of the innovations that come out of the Army for those purposes? With that said, one of the things I wanted to highlight is some of the things that we, as well as OAS, is working on for you to, just to give some examples in terms of how we think about this. Co-creating tailor-made solutions for what you have identified as your risk is critical. One of the things that we've been looking at is, I'm going to give some concrete solutions as to how you can actually promote this. One is consolidating, for example, how you do your incident response, considering staff development as a part of that component. Oftentimes we think of incident response as just one aspect, guys sitting behind a screen ensuring that that happens. But how do you ensure that you have that staff development component of it? How do you ensure that a person who starts off as a data analyst can end up moving into forensics, can end up moving into another field? So a concrete solution to you is, as you think about your basic teams, for example, your incident response teams, ensure that you have some amount of staff development component. How are we doing it as the OAS? Because that was a question. Currently, we have something called our CSERTs Americas Network. As a part of that, we actually have 16 military certs participating in that. What have we done as the OAS? We've ensured that within that, we have what is called our CSERTs Americas Academy. The Academy breaks down certain skill sets that anyone who's a part of the network, we partner with Cisco for this, anyone who's and we partner with CESENE CERT, which is the CERT from Spain. Anyone who's a part of the network can be part of the Academy, and you can have self-paced training. Why do I cite this example? Each country can actually think about their staff development from one, soft skills, the awareness, to hard skills. Those who are actually associated with certain job roles, ensuring that they have a trajectory, that they can improve their skills on a regular basis. Another area that I think can be included in your framework is to consider external networking. How have you established collaboration among other incident response teams within the military with other countries? Thinking about your traditional agreements that you already have for exercising. You may have a person leaving from here to go and do joint exercise trainings in Suriname, for example. How are you now layering in that cyber component to do your TTXs, your digital exercising? And I'm pushing the traditional stuff because you guys do this well. You guys collaborate well across the globe in terms of joint exercises, joint operations. Think about cybersecurity as just that other element. How do I ensure that my teams do those joint operations and joint trainings? One of the things that your trainings do is that it helps you to exercise protocols and steps that needs to happen in the event is an incident. And it's the same thing that would happen in the event of a cyber incident. Another thing that I wanted to suggest as a part of your framework is participating in CERT systems. recognizing that you're not alone, and a part of defending the various parts of critical infrastructure also includes pragmatic and fruitful coming together of those things. Another thing is implementing national cybersecurity strategies and policies. The OAS promotes national cybersecurity strategies, and we recognize that in some instances, countries may want to have national cyber defense strategies, and to recognize that that is important in implementing it. Another aspect I wanted to suggest is looking at your recruitment and how you recruit. As a part of that, thinking about the youth and ensuring that they understand there is a career path in this. Diverse skills are needed. Cybersecurity offers like a wide set of cybersecurity skills. So if you think about it, a youth who's aspiring to be an ethical hacker, how can that person be a good tool for you in defense? We spoke about utilizing private sector, as we had our colleagues before from Syntac and talking about some of the tools that they have. But how do we ensure that you have the persons on the inside who can utilize those tools? We spoke about cybersecurity culture, ensuring that you do have some culture within the institutions. Social engineering awareness is critical as well as a part of your broad set educational strategy. And I think the last point I'd probably want to make on this is employee training programs that ensure that they're aware of best practices as they come along. One of the things that we would want to kind of just rest with you is in thinking about inter-American defense educational framework is to take it from the same systematic approach that you do all things right now. It is no different. And the reason why I'm trying to demystify the concept of it, it's because we think about it in such a outside thing. It's something outside of our sphere, outside of our knowledge, outside of our capability. But an educational framework for the defense, for cybersecurity, falls under the same levels that it does for your traditional educational now. I would just want to summarize what I've shared just by saying more categorically, cybersecurity education is needed, yes. The second question is, how do we do this? My suggestion is looking at your risk assessments and finding the skill sets needed to meet the answers to those risks you've identified. Is cybersecurity a whole different career within the Army? Probably yes, but it's still associated with the services that you provide to your states. And last, recognizing that your biggest risk sometimes is the human factor as an insider. Ensure that you have a dedicated cyber awareness campaign that is constant. It's not something that you do once a month, but it's something as a basic training requirement for all persons who are part. And on that note, I know I went really quickly, but it's because I think the topic that I was asked to share on was such a very precise one, and I think it was a very good one, but I thought it was a pretty simple, direct response that was needed to the ask. So I'll stop there for questions because I think I'd want to open the space for questions. So I hand over the mic.
To keep the time on track, we will do the debate in this position that you are now. Mr. Carrion, thank you very much for your presentation, which gain insight into education and awareness in cybersecurity, empowering individuals and institutions. I believe the most relevant aspects of your presentation address to the contrast between increasing of the threats and the shortage in the cybersecurity workforce. I think is the biggest one. And also the demand for the future training for cybersecurity and the need to create a shared awareness of cybersecurity. We showed some suggestions for questions for you, but you went along. You talked too much about these specific questions. But we received some question from General Hugo Quijano from Peru. He gave one question: how to face the challenges of reducing cybersecurity learning gaps in societies that have limited access to information technologies. How can we do that?
Just a couple of ways. One of the things I always look at is, what is your threat landscape? What are your touch points to technology, and how do you mitigate the ones that you can? In risk management, there's always the tolerable risks the risk that you can actually tolerate, and if something goes wrong, you could probably mitigate it or fix it, and look at the risk that you can't tolerate. So when I tell people is when you have limited resources, the first thing that you have to think about are what are the risks that I can't afford to take? What are the risks that if this happens, I will be devastated? So when we have persons with limited access to training or limited ability to be trained, I always look at it from the perspective of ensuring that when you've identified those risks that cannot be tolerated, cannot be absorbed, ensure that's where you put your energy and your focus, recognizing that that is where you're going to need an immediate response and you need the skill sets for that. Everything is kind of global now in terms of access to training. So what I would suggest is if it's an institution or an organization that feels they don't have access, is to start looking first at some of the basic things that are free online. So for example, Microsoft, Cisco, AWS, all offer free training, not always free certification, but at the very baseline, recognize that there are resources available online from Coursera to AWS to Cisco, Microsoft, and a few others. So my short answer to that would be, think about the risk, think about the skills that you need to address that risk, and let that be your priority. Prioritization is key when you have limited resources.
As the allotted time for questions to Mr. Carrie Ann Barrett comes to an end, we bid farewell to our speaker. Mrs. Carrie Ann Barrett, on behalf of the Organization of the American States and the Inter-American Defense Board, I want to express our gratitude for your work in the field of education, your participation in our event, and the excellence of your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Apresentamos agora o próximo palestrante de nosso evento, Capitão de Mar e Guerra Luciano Moraes de Oliveira, que é oficial da Marinha do Brasil e assessor de defesa cibernética da Junta Interamericana de Defesa, e nos brindará com sua apresentação intitulada Promovendo a Cooperação Hemisférica, Mecanismos e Parcerias para uma Defesa. Capitão de Mar e Guerra Luciano Moraes de Oliveira, convidamos para iniciar a sua apresentação. Por favor, comandante, a audiência é sua.
Muito obrigado pela oportunidade. Muito obrigado a todos os presentes aqui e online. A gente conta com um número extraordinário de participantes pelas nossas redes sociais e pelos nossos canais. E a gente está aqui para falar sobre cooperação hemisférica. Eu acho que essa palavra cooperação é muito importante. Eu não me recordo desde os primeiros momentos, das 9 horas da manhã, quando a gente teve a primeira apresentação, na verdade, as primeiras palavras de abertura do general Highcamp, essa palavra foi citada, e foi citada em todas as apresentações. Então, é para isso que a gente é essa apresentação que a gente vai fazer aqui hoje. A gente vai percorrer essa breve agenda, fazer uma breve introdução, falar sobre o que é a Junta Interamericana de Defesa, é muito importante. Muita gente não conhece exatamente o que a gente faz hoje. Falar sobre o Programa de Defesa Cibernética, o futuro da cooperação em defesa cibernética e uma conclusão. Eu não vou me estender muito nesse aspecto da defesa, da ameaça cibernética, porque isso foi bastante falado aqui, principalmente a gente pode ver essa pesquisa da Checkpoint Research, foi falado pelo senhor Alejandro Botter, e também pelo general Highcamp. A ameaça cibernética está presente hoje em dia e está evoluindo cada vez mais com as novas ferramentas. E a gente tem dificuldade de acompanhar essas novas ferramentas que vão surgindo, esse avanço da tecnologia. Então, dizer que a ameaça cibernética está presente, dizer que ela nos atinge, essa invasão silenciosa, como citou nas suas palavras de abertura o general Highcamp, andar em cima do mesmo passo que todo mundo está andando aqui. Então, a gente mencionar a importância que a gente tem que dar à ameaça cibernética é clara. Apenas mais algum dado que a gente vai falar sobre a ameaça cibernética, e eu já vou passar mais adiante falando sobre essa pergunta. que vai ser respondida no final. Um elo fraco de uma corrente enfraquece toda a corrente. E como que a gente pode ganhar esse jogo? Essa foto aqui é a foto que representa o prédio onde a gente está hoje transmitindo essa conferência e vocês estão aqui assistindo essa conferência, a Casa do Soldado, uma casa histórica, onde é a sede da Junta Interamericana de Defesa. E a Junta Interamericana de Defesa foi criada em 1942 no contexto da Segunda Guerra Mundial. Logo em seguida, cerca de 20 anos depois, foi criado o Colégio Interamericano de Defesa, onde pôde ser difundida o que se pretendia da defesa do hemisfério e formar líderes para pensar e planejar a defesa do hemisfério. Contudo, na mudança do contexto mundial, da ordem global, o contexto histórico, a partir de 2006, o foco da Junta Interamericana de Defesa mudou. A Junta Interamericana de Defesa passou a fazer parte da Organização dos Estados Americanos e passou a trabalhar com outro enfoque. Até 2006, a Junta Interamericana de Defesa pensava a defesa do hemisfério. A partir daí, voltado mais às ameaças mais difusas e mais complexas, passou-se a pensar a segurança multidimensional e a Junta Interamericana de Defesa passou a prestar assessoria à Organização dos Estados Americanos e aos seus Estados-membros e a quem nos demanda, de certa forma, independente de ser Estado-membro da Junta, mas sendo Estado-membro da Organização dos Estados Americanos, a prestar assessoria técnica em matérias de defesa voltada para a segurança multidimensional. Essa assessoria é prestada em diversas atividades: defesa cibernética, construção de medidas de confiança e segurança, direitos humanos, gênero, com o Programa de Mulheres, Paz e Segurança, gestão de armas, segurança marítima, proteção do meio ambiente, desminagem humanitária e assistência humanitária e resposta a desastres. Esses são basicamente as atividades que os assessores daqui, nem sempre especializados nesses temas todos, a gente busca trabalhar. Porque a Junta Interamericana de Defesa funciona, como está dito nesse texto aqui, do Programa de Defesa Cibernética, como um facilitador de quem precisa, do Estado-membro que precisa de um auxílio, de um apoio, de uma informação, de uma assessoria para aquele outro Estado-membro ou outra instituição que pode prestar essa assessoria. Então, não só no Programa de Defesa Cibernética, mas todos os programas da JID, os assessores que aqui estão, buscam conectar aquele que precisa com aquele que pode ajudar. Falando especificamente do nosso programa de defesa cibernética, esse programa ele é suportado por 3 pilares: rede de contatos, construção de capacidades e conferências. Eu vou falar bem sucintamente sobre cada um desses pilares aqui, que são extremamente importantes e na verdade, eles estão imbricados, estão interconectados, esses 3 pilares, perdão. Bem, a nossa primeira camada de rede de contatos é o próprio salão de delegados. Essa foto que vocês estão vendo aí pela internet, vocês estão aqui sentados, quem está aqui na junta assistindo a palestra está sentado, é o Conselho de Delegados, aqui onde os delegados, os Estados-membros, representantes dos Estados-membros se reúnem para discutir as necessidades, as demandas, os mandatos que a Organização dos Estados Americanos nos propõe. E esse é a nossa primeira camada, é quem primeiro nos demanda e para quem primeiro a gente presta assessoria. Mas para que a gente possa prestar assessoria para essa primeira camada, a gente não depende só dos assessores que estão aqui e dos demais Estados-membros. A gente precisa estar conectado com organizações diversas organizações internacionais que também são nossos sócios, que normalmente não nos demandam muita coisa, mas que nos auxiliam, nos assessoram, prestando informações, auxiliando os Estados-membros, sendo colocado em contato com aqueles Estados-membros que nos pedem auxílio, ajuda para construir suas capacidades, para ter gente para falar em determinadas conferências, para saber o que está acontecendo de mais moderno dentro das atividades que a JID propõe e trabalha. E, além dessas organizações internacionais, a gente também tem como sócios diversas instituições de ensino, que é daí que a gente pega as novas ideias, as lições aprendidas, as novidades, tudo que está avançado em termos de tecnologia e que pode ser útil para os Estados-membros, aquela nossa primeira camada mencionada. Além de instituições de ensino, também, mais especificamente para o Programa de Defesa Cibernética, a gente tem essas empresas que nos apoiaram nos eventos que a gente realizou esse ano. A gente tem parceria com diversas empresas. E muito do que a gente aprende e ouve como lição aprendida, isso faz parte da construção da nossa rede de contatos, está na participação em diversos eventos, ou como ouvinte, ou como palestrante, diversos eventos proporcionados pelos Estados-membros e de eventos empresas em que os assessores aqui podem se inscrever e participar, os assessores da JID. A gente participa disso para trazer para os Estados-membros as novidades, as oportunidades que a gente consegue adquirir e aprender aí nesses eventos. Isso robustece a nossa rede de contatos. Então, essa rede de contatos proporciona esse mar de soluções que aparece nessa foto. Ponentes, ideias, pensamentos, lições aprendidas. Isso que a gente consegue com essa rede de contato robusta e assertiva. O nosso outro pilar é a construção de capacidade. Dentro desse pilar, utilizando as nossas redes de contatos, a gente consegue fazer cursos com apoio dos Estados-membros. A JID efetivamente não tem estrutura para ela própria proporcionar um curso, mas com o apoio das organizações internacionais que a gente é parceiro, empresas, Estados-membros, a gente consegue patrocinar os cursos, consegue realizar o curso, alguns deles baseados na nossa guia de defesa cibernética, que está disponível na nossa página da internet. Essa guia de defesa cibernética, por exemplo, foi feita com apoio do Canadá. O Canadá nos apoiou na confecção, e a Fundação Interamericana de Defesa nos apoiou e proporcionou a confecção dessa guia de defesa cibernética, que é distribuída e está disponível para todos os Estados-membros. Além disso, no que diz respeito à construção de capacidades, aqui na JID criamos, baseado no exercício Capture the Flag, um novo conceito de exercício, Cooperation for Flag. Esse exercício traz a novidade de que as equipes precisam se ajudar para poder avançar nos desafios propostos. Então, é uma maneira diferente e de motivar com que os Estados-membros se ajudem na solução dos seus problemas. A gente executou 2 exercícios esse ano, o primeiro com mais de 150 participantes, distribuído em 57 equipes e a participação de 15 países, entre Estados-membros e observadores. No segundo exercício, realizado há pouco, em outubro, a gente teve, antes do exercício, 2 workshops preparatórios com 2 empresas parceiras, a GoHacking e o Google, proporcionaram para os Estados-membros, não era fechado aos Estados-membros, tivemos a participação de mais de 800 pessoas nesses 2 workshops, e foram preparatórios para o segundo exercício, que foi realizado em outubro. Esse exercício a gente teve menos equipes, mas tivemos mais participantes, mais Estados-membros e 2 organizações internacionais participando conosco. Foi muito importante e é muito profícuo. E a gente pretende, para o próximo ano, continuando a construção de capacidades, focar agora nos tomadores de decisões, fazer um exercício tabletop de simulações para tomadores de decisões. E a gente pretende fazer isso ainda no primeiro semestre do próximo ano. E a gente conta com a ajuda da nossa rede de contatos, as organizações, as empresas, os Estados-membros com as suas forças armadas, para nos apoiar a fazer esse exercício. O nosso terceiro pilar são as conferências. As conferências que a gente consegue fazer com as lições aprendidas dos exercícios, com as nossas redes de contatos, aí a gente consegue o que a gente tem feito aqui desde 2019, com a Junta Interamericana de Defesa, os Estados-membros, a Fundação Interamericana de Defesa, conseguimos compartilhar as ideias, porque não há por que a gente aprender as coisas e guardar, porque se a gente não compartilhar as ideias, a gente não se fortalece, que é o nosso objetivo principal. Então, desde 2019, a gente vem realizando conferências a cada ano. Tivemos dificuldade por causa do período de 2020, que foi obscuro para todo mundo e complicado, pandemia, e a gente teve que deixar de fazer presencial, fizemos virtuais, mas não deixamos de fazer e de compartilhar as ideias nessas nossas conferências, que é o nosso terceiro pilar, que é onde a gente consegue conectar todos os outros dois pilares, a rede de contatos e a construção de capacidade. E a gente já tem data, e peço que vocês aí de casa e aqui salvem essa data, 30 de outubro de 2024, será a nossa próxima Conferência Hemisférica. Estão todos desde já convidados, podem aportar com ideias, com soluções, assistindo, e estamos aqui para divulgar e para proporcionar esse compartilhamento de ideias e soluções e lições aprendidas. E qual é o futuro que a gente espera para a defesa cibernética, para a cooperação hemisférica de defesa cibernética? A gente pretende, no futuro, construir um marco de cooperação que una esses três pilares, que una os Estados-membros de uma forma mais assertiva, de uma forma mais concreta, que a gente possa criar e construir capacidades e a gente proteger o nosso hemisfério, estar sempre, cada Estado-membro, fortalecido em si próprio e como região. Então, a gente pretende construir um marco de cooperação hemisférico e, num futuro um pouco mais distante, talvez uma escola virtual de defesa cibernética, uma escola hemisférica, utilizando a nossa rede de contatos, buscando a construção de capacidades e o compartilhamento de ideias. Então, senhoras e senhores, respondendo aquela primeira questão que colocamos aqui, juntos somos mais fortes. Ninguém faz nada sozinho. Ninguém faz nada sem principalmente em defesa. A gente não consegue trabalhar sozinho. Então, precisamos de cooperação para promover a confiança e o fortalecimento da confiança e da segurança hemisférica. Essa que é o nosso principal foco aqui. E muito rapidamente, agradeço a paciência de todos aqui. Se vocês querem fazer parte da nossa rede, podem escanear esse QR Code, tem um formulário, vocês podem preencher para fazer parte da nossa rede, proporcionar ideias, temas para as nossas conferências, soluções, contribuir, aportar recursos, patrocinar os nossos eventos. Vocês podem nos seguir nas nossas redes sociais, e nesse QR Code tem um formulário para que vocês façam parte da nossa rede. Muito obrigado pela nossa paciência, pela paciência de vocês em estar aqui conosco nessa apresentação.
Comandante Luciano Moraes, muito obrigado por sua apresentação, na qual conhecemos uma visão sobre o tema Promovendo a Cooperação Hemisférica, Mecanismos e Parcerias para a Defesa. Alguns aspectos importantes que foram apresentados durante as suas palavras. A necessidade do incremento da discussão sobre ameaças cibernéticas, a importância dos eventos relacionados com a defesa cibernética nas Américas, a crescente demanda de mecanismos para atuação no ambiente cibernético e, particularmente importante, é a cooperação, que foi tratada por todos os palestrantes que aqui estiveram. É importante destacar que algumas das respostas apresentadas ao questionamento inicial, que foi formulada no começo de todas as apresentações, como alcançar a cooperação internacional em defesa cibernética. Algumas respostas que tivemos no nosso chat. Incremento dos treinamentos e exercícios cibernéticos. Outra resposta, valorização da educação e execução de cursos especializados para a área de cibernética. Um outro tópico, intercâmbio de experiências no setor cibernético. aumento da divulgação de temas relacionados à cibernética. Então, isso aí tudo foi apresentado por todos aqueles que participaram do nosso chat. E, nesse sentido, vêm as nossas perguntas. De que maneira podemos implementar a cooperação hemisférica em defesa cibernética?
Bem, como a gente disse, como foi dito aqui na minha apresentação, a cooperação hemisférica depende da vontade de cada Estado-membro de participar. Então, dentro dos nossos pilares, e o Programa de Defesa Cibernética foi pensado nisso, obviamente visando a cooperação, fazer parte da rede de contatos, aportar ideias e soluções, contribuir para a construção de capacidades junto da JID e utilizando a Junta Interamericana de Defesa como um grande facilitador, porque é isso que, na verdade, nós somos um hub de recebimento de demandas dos Estados-membros, difusão para as nossas redes de contatos, instituições parceiras, organismos internacionais, empresas, buscando essas respostas e difundindo de novo para os nossos Estados-membros. É assim que a gente consegue a cooperação e é assim que a gente consegue fortalecer cada Estado-membro. Então, o que a gente busca dentro do seu programa de defesa cibernética, especificamente, que a gente está tratando hoje, e dos demais programas, dos diversos eixos temáticos que a gente trabalha, é receber essas informações e construir e difundir essas ideias, compartilhar essas ideias e lições aprendidas. Então, para que a gente possa aprofundar e progredir na nossa cooperação hemisférica, é importante a gente ter um marco de cooperação, algo que nos direcione de certa forma. É isso que a gente está buscando no futuro, construir esse marco de cooperação em defesa cibernética.
Ao término do tempo designado para as perguntas ao capitão de mar e guerra Luciano Moraes de Oliveira, resta-nos apenas agradecer por suas informações. Comandante, em nome da Organização dos Estados Americanos e da Junta Interamericana de Defesa, quero expressar nosso agradecimento pelo seu trabalho em prol da defesa cibernética, por sua participação em nosso evento e pela excelência da palestra apresentada. Muito obrigado. Após as excepcionais apresentações de nossos palestrantes, apresentamos agora o brigadeiro Flávio Luiz de Oliveira Pinto, diretor-geral da Secretaria da Junta Interamericana de Defesa, que proferirá as palavras finais da Conferência Hemisférica de Defesa Cibernética. Por favor, brigadeiro, a audiência é sua.
Inicialmente, muito obrigado, Luciano, pela sua apresentação. Obrigado a todos os palestrantes. Luciano, agradeço na sua pessoa toda a equipe de organização e coordenação desse evento, um evento que realmente é um sucesso. Senhoras e senhores, boa tarde. É com grande satisfação que me dirijo a todos aqui presentes e também àqueles que nos acompanham de maneira virtual, destacando, inclusive, já foi comentado o sucesso da participação pelo comandante Luciano, mas no momento, eu chequei agora há pouco, temos mais de 1.200 dispositivos conectados. Considerando que temos conhecimento que muitas pessoas nos acompanham por um mesmo dispositivo, como, por exemplo, em escolas e centros especializados, temos esse conhecimento, é seguro afirmar que milhares de pessoas beberam do conhecimento dos palestrantes aqui hoje. Então, muito obrigado aos palestrantes e agradecemos com grande satisfação a todos aqueles que acompanharam o evento de hoje, pela participação frente ao tema, que é importante denotarmos, ao final, ao término, no encerramento, qual era o nosso objetivo, qual era a proposta apresentada pelo tema, fortalecendo os escudos cibernéticos rumo à cooperação hemisférica em defesa digital. Destaco aqui que ficou muito claro que cooperação foi a palavra-chave de todo o nosso evento. Haja vista que o atual cenário digital que vivemos, senhoras e senhores, em constante evolução, nos impõe enormes desafios, fortalecendo a necessidade de apoio e integração em tema tão sensível. Daí a importância do objetivo proposto e, ora, plenamente atingido, seguro afirmar qual foi o objetivo proposto e que foi atingido. Estimular o desenvolvimento no mais alto nível do ambiente hemisférico no campo da defesa cibernética, a fim de contribuir com a promoção de oportunidades, a cooperação e a interação no setor. Nesta oportunidade, foi reunida uma comunidade de especialistas de diversos países para tratar de um assunto de extrema relevância, tendo sido intelectualmente motivadora e profícua no estímulo da cooperação, oferecendo o ambiente ideal para a apresentação de estratégias inovadoras e compartilhamento de percepções no âmbito da defesa cibernética. Como já foi dito, desde 2019, a JID tem realizado atividades para impulsionar o tema e promover a colaboração internacional nessa área através de seminários e de conferências, possibilitando discussões e contribuindo com o fortalecimento do ambiente digital em nosso hemisfério. E o futuro? Bem, nossa ênfase continuará sendo a cooperação internacional, com um destaque específico para as novas tecnologias preparadas para reforçar a resiliência cibernética nas Américas, uma abordagem que exige perspectivas multilaterais para uma melhor compreensão. Dessa forma, a JID reafirma seu compromisso de assumir um papel cada vez mais relevante em defesa cibernética, consolidando as relações, promovendo os interesses comuns e compartilhando as melhores práticas entre seus países membros. Por fim, senhoras e senhores, agradeço mais uma vez a todos pelo apoio e pela participação, e em especial aos ilustres palestrantes pela disponibilidade de compartilharem conosco seus conhecimentos e experiências. Bem, muito obrigado. Thank you. Muitas gracias.
Antes de encerrar a transmissão de nossa conferência, aproveitamos a oportunidade para convidar a audiência para nosso próximo evento, o Seminário de Direitos Humanos e Direito Internacional Humanitário em Operações Militares, que ocorrerá em 30 de novembro, a partir das 9 horas, horário de Washington, com transmissão pelas plataformas Zoom e YouTube. Também convidamos a todos para visitar nosso site www.jid.org. Nesse site, o público poderá acompanhar as atividades desempenhadas pela Junta Interamericana de Defesa e tomar conhecimento de nossas próximas atividades. Por fim, agradecemos a participação de todos e esperamos vê-los em breve nos eventos vindouros. Tenham todos um excelente dia.